Hey everyone! Today I'm going to tell you about an absolutely mind-blowing story. About a young girl who woke up in a situation she couldn't understand, terrified and confused Kana Addis. A girl cursed from birth with black hair and black eyes the same color as the dreaded black fog that destroyed an entire continent. Abandoned by her family, abused by everyone, treated as a living sin just for existing. But then one day her soul transferred into the body of Li Juhua, and for 12 incredible years, she lived a completely different life. Surrounded by a loving family, becoming a successful Oriental medicine doctor, building her own business. But when she woke up back in her original body, Kana was absolutely horrified. Li Juhua had turned her life into a living nightmare. Married off to the cold Duke Silvian Valentino, through a contract, tortured by her stepmother Josephine, humiliated by servants who didn't even respect her as an aristocrat. Now Kana must fight back, reclaim her dignity, and escape this terrible marriage. Will she succeed? Let's find out. A young girl found herself in a situation she didn't understand. She had no idea what had happened to her, and the situation itself terrified her. She was gripping the pants of a stranger, trying to hold on to him, but she didn't even know who he was. She raised her gaze to the stranger when he asked her to let go of his pants. The guy adjusted his tie, showing no sign of hiding his irritation. He looked down with a smile and promised that after such repulsive behavior, he would never look at her again. The cold tone of his voice left her stunned, but Recap Manhwa, she was looking up at him. She didn't understand what he was saying, although her attention was more focused on the stranger's beauty. The guy raised his chin and threatened that their conversation was the last, and they wouldn't talk about it again. The stranger called her Kana, and promised to use force if she didn't let go of his hand, a name that hadn't been used in a long time. It plunged her into the state of panic. She released the stranger's clothing, after which he walked away without looking back. The heavy door of the room slammed shut with a loud bang, and Kana was left alone in an unfamiliar room. However, now that she could be away from the gaze of others, a wave of anxiety flooded her mind. The name Kana was very familiar to her. The girl took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but it didn't work well. So gripping the hem of her dress, she repeated her name over and over, finally managing to control her emotions. The girl looked around, and with relief realized that she had returned to her body. She was Kana Addis, a member of the second family of guardians that protected the Western continent. But being the eldest daughter of the Duke Addis, she bore the mark of an illegitimate child, hence her impure blood. This was the reason why the entire family distanced themselves from her. As a child, Kana was an outcast, because her black hair and eyes terrified those around her. So all she could do was listen to the insults directed at her without ever confronting her aggressors. In the world where Kana was born, there exists a disaster that has manifested as a sudden black fog since ancient times. In ancient times, it completely ravaged the southern continent. With hair and eyes the color of the black fog, people saw her as a threat, and her mere existence was considered a grave sin. That's why all the gazes of those who knew her were filled with evident disdain towards her. The disdain was also shown by the members of the Addis family. They kept their distance from her. Her stepmother and younger sister did not hide their disgust when seeing Kana. Her younger brother used to argue with her, which ended in fights where Kana couldn't defend herself. However, her second brother always pretended to be kind, but treated her like a servant in the Duke's palace. But all of this wasn't so sad, because there was still her father. He only watched how they treated her and did nothing. Despite the beauty of her soul, she lived each day, overcoming the hatred that burned in the Addis family. Kana lived 14 years in that situation. But one day when she woke up, she saw a strange landscape through the window. At that moment, her life took an unexpected turn, and as she got out of bed, Kana realized that she was now in the body of a girl named Li Juhua. Examining her new body in the mirror, Kana found nothing in common with her real appearance. Now her hair was light, and her body a few years more mature. The girl screamed in horror, unable to believe how much her face had changed. Kana moved in front of the mirror, still trying to appreciate all the changes. Suddenly it occurred to her that perhaps her obsession with alchemy had caused something unexpected. She tried to convince herself that she wasn't crazy, but time kept passing. Her soul remained trapped in the body of a stranger, and she had no choice but to accept the situation and stop looking for answers as time was advancing and she had to keep up with it. Kana's most important decision was that now her soul was in the body of Li Juhua, which meant they shared a special strength, so denying it would change nothing. But now that she had returned to her body, she still remembered how hard she had worked and learned to live in the body of Li Juhua. By entering Juhua's body, Kana acquired all of the other girls' knowledge. That's why she adapted quickly to the new world, although that knowledge served as good clues in moments of desperation. The psychological shock overwhelmed her with unbearable panic. However, if Kana had returned home, that only meant she had overcome all the challenges while living in the body of Li Juhua. At 17, Kana learned patience and resilience, so by 29, she managed to secure a position at a medical institution. Achieving such success took Kana 12 years as she studied with dedication, and was always the first to finish her exams. In the end, she obtained her medical license from an institution of Oriental medicine. Before returning to her body, Kana spent a lot of time researching. Trying to remember the last days gave Kana a headache, but she found no answers to her questions. The young woman sat beside the bed. She had no strength to get up. She remembered that moments before she had fallen asleep in Li Juhua's body and had promised herself that soon her difficult life would improve when she had the first body exchange. Kana decided to accept that gift and live honestly the life of Li Juhua because for her, the life of a stranger was much better than her own. In the new body, nothing reminded her of her past. She was happier than ever. Being Li Juhua, Kana experienced the affection of her mother, who always supported her in moments of doubt. She learned kindness and attention because in her new family she had a father and a brother who always cared about her life. In those moments, although she was in a foreign body, she reached out like a little kitten to learn how to live again. Before the exchange, she had never dreamed of finding the warmth that the Yua family gave her expelling from her mind the sad memories. Kana jumped off the floor and ran to the mirror. The young woman examined her body that seemed foreign to her. She was once again that girl with dark hair and gloomy black eyes that radiated danger, which Kana had tried so hard to forget. The girl stepped away from the mirror. She had seen her real face many years ago, but even as she grew up, she hadn't changed much. Kana couldn't take her eyes off the reflection. Her real face intrigued her now that she confirmed she had returned to her world. She remembered the guy, who at first seemed unfamiliar. Kana had a suspicion about who he was, but if her suspicions were true, she found herself in a very bad situation. She leaned against the table with her hands. Her life had changed again, and now it resembled a bomb about to explode at any moment. Her thoughts filled with anxiety. Once again, she had no choice. Just like when she was 14, small tears began to form in her eyes, but she managed to hold them back. Kana decided that she was no longer the same scared girl from the Addis family. She had changed too much, and she had no intention of silencing her desires. She found a personal diary written by another girl during the body exchange. But all the reflections in the notebook were about how she used the knowledge from a book to win over the Duke. However, not even the fact that marrying the Duke was a contract alerted the girl in Kana's body. The diary was filled with plans to conquer the Duke. Upon reading all the content, Kana felt absolute horror. But more than horror, she felt fury at how they used her body without control. The emotions overwhelmed her, so without resisting, she hit the diary with her hand. The diary was written in Korean, so no one but Kana could decipher its content. Although the descriptions confirmed that Kana and Li Juhua had lived in separate bodies for the last 12 years, meanwhile, in a world Kana tried to study and develop her business, Li Juhua only dreamed of marrying the Duke. According to the diary, Li Juhua fell in love with the Duke and proposed that he use her. The proposal surprised the man who demanded details from Li Ju. That day, Li Ju proposed to the Duke to sign a contract, according to which marrying her would help him free himself from the power of the imperial family. During the time spent with the Duke, Li Ju understood that he had no intention of marrying the second princess of the imperial family, so she suggested an alternative. The more Kana immersed herself in reading the diary, the more intense her anger grew at Li Ju's foolishness. Kana couldn't believe that precisely Sylvian Valentino was now bound to her by the ties of marriage when the whole kingdom knew that man's uncontrolled temperament. Sylvian was undoubtedly a handsome and well-educated man, but all that was nothing more than an exterior mask, as marrying such a dangerous man hid many secrets and complications. Now Kana understood that after the body exchange, Li Ju had fallen in love at first sight with the Duke and dedicated all her time to courting him. Li Ju didn't hesitate to put up posters with love confessions to the Duke in the middle of the shopping street. Sometimes she sent gifts to his office, but that didn't yield results. In a fit of desperation, Li Ju sneaked into the Duke's chambers at night to seduce him, but his reaction towards her remained cold. Such acts provoked in the man a disdain towards the young woman, to the point where at some moment he started to regret the signed contract. The Duke's indifference towards Li Ju saddened the girl, but according to the diary's notes, she was firmly determined to win the man's heart at any cost. Kana opened the last page of the diary where she discovered that Li Ju's plan was to kneel before the Duke and beg for his attention. Kana approached the window. She already knew everything, but now she needed to calm down to plan her next moves. Outside, the sun was still shining. She calculated that she was now 26 years old. She was in her real body, which meant that Li Juhua had returned to hers. Kana laughed at the thought that just a moment ago Li Ju was kneeling before the Duke, and now suddenly she had to prepare to go to work. She imagined that Li Ju would excitedly head to work and continue with another life. Kana became angry at the thought that Li Ju might poorly care for her patients and lose her medical license. She assumed that if in the first exchange, she remembered Li Juhua's memories then, repeating it would mean that Li Juhua should also remember all the knowledge Kana had accumulated. Kana calmed down thinking that her medical license wouldn't be lost, but she was horrified at the thought that her business would be destroyed in yet another body. While trying to live someone else's life, she had taken an interest in medicinal herbs and started making handmade soaps, candles, and perfumes. But what had started as a simple hobby grew into a complete online store that had supplied customers with numerous orders in recent years. Kana grabbed her hair, as now, the innocence of Li Juhua would ruin the business to which she had dedicated so much effort and time. She tried to remember how she had returned to her body just before the transfer. Kana had finished making a new type of scented candle. So after work, she gathered with her family and presented the new product which everyone liked. That was the last memory Kana had of her other life, but now she was alone in the middle of an unfamiliar room. The young woman convinced herself that she had to take control of the situation, as despair would not solve her problems. Kana had already understood that Sylvian Valentino treated her body with total contempt. A memory of begging on the floor in front of the Duke gave Kana the strength to decide on the next plan. The young woman calmed down and concluded that divorcing such a horrible man as Duke Valentino was the right decision in her current situation. Kana inspected the room. The Duke was not in the palace, so she could only announce the divorce the next day. The young woman climbed into bed hoping that the Duke would also be happy with her decision to annul the marriage just like she was. But there was a huge problem, as Duke Alessandro Addis, who was still her father, could deny his consent to the divorce. The Western continent is different from Korea, where Kana had spent half of her life, which means that only the father can approve the divorce, not the government authorities. Kana clearly remembered her father's character as in their last meeting. He stated that his daughter was a scandal for the Addis family. Upon learning of his daughter's marriage, Duke Addis left and wished that Kana's curse would pass to the Valentino family, not the Addis. At that moment, the young woman was emotionally shattered, but she didn't have the courage to confront her father. Kana reflected that if she were in another body, her father Li Juhua would take great care of her and would surely defend her daughter's honor if he knew how she was treated. Heavy thoughts exhausted the young woman's mind, which is why she fell onto the bed. She decided that it was best to sleep well first and then plan, as Kana still believed that it was just a bad dream. In the darkness of her consciousness, a dream appeared as if a little Kana approached her father with questions about her mother. The girl was very agitated, not knowing what reaction to expect from her father. The man, whose face was hidden in semi-darkness, abruptly turned towards the voice. His eyes were overflowing with rage. He stood up and Kana prepared herself for him to hit her. But a loud scream echoed in the room as the man demanded that his illegitimate child never mention her mother in his presence. The Duke leaned over the girl, his eyes shone with fury, but he repeated his order more firmly. The little girl broke free from his hands and ran to the other end of the room, knowing that her father hated not only her mother, but also Kana. The hatred that existed in the Addis family extended not only to its members, but also to their friends. That's why with every act of outsiders, Kana felt more abandoned than alone. Her brother's friends always mocked her dark hair, but besides that, they convinced them to turn against her. Relying on others' opinions, her brother Orsini became the main bully and channeled his anger directly onto Kana to maintain his status as a leader among his friends. Orsini supported his insults and personally started fights with Kana. The dream suddenly cut off, and the young woman woke up in the same bed in the Valentino estate. The first thing Kana saw was a vase with cold water that had been poured on her. The girl sat up in bed as a tall maid leaned over her. The maid looked at her with disdain and wondered why Kana was still in the Duke's bed. Kana wiped the drops of water from her face, trying to calm down after a disturbing dream. She looked around. The room was still the same, which meant that the body change had become real. She was not prepared for that truth. It would have been better if everything had just been a bad dream. The maid caught her attention with shouts and demands for Kana to leave the Duke's bed. The woman was very rude and demanding. When Kana turned to look at her, she realized that as a 14-year-old girl, she wouldn't have said anything in response to the maid's shouts. If Recap Manhwa Kana hadn't changed during her stay in the foreign body, she would have been trembling with fear and trying to escape, but by giving her a calm glance, she understood that her personality had already changed. The girl tried to be nice and asked the maid what her name was, although a memory suddenly surged in Kana's mind, showing how the same maid had hit her in the face. The woman was also impatient, as the lady had fallen asleep earlier in Kana's body, and that's why she couldn't face the authoritarian maid and only accepted the punishments, always apologizing for any fault. The memory ended, but Kana recalled the name of the maid and addressed her. Mary examined the girl, with skepticism, noticing that something had changed, but she seemed to be indeed still Kana. The maid composed herself and declared that the lady should not pretend to be foolish, but should get up and go greet the lady of the house. The authoritative tone amused Kana. Of course, she remembered Mary Goldian and the morning ritual of greeting the lady. The young woman leaned back on the pillow and firmly stated that she had no intention of meeting the lady or anyone else. The maid's mood changed abruptly, but Kana didn't like that she called her lady carelessly. Lifting her hair, Kana demanded that she call her madam, since she was the owner of this mansion and the Duchess of Valen. Mary was outraged by such impertinent behavior, but then the maid realized that any attempt by the young woman to pretend to be a noble aristocrat she could easily stop. The servants knew that Duke Valen didn't pay attention to the young woman and that her title of Duchess was only a facade. Even the Addis family after the marriage never took an interest in Kana's life. But even the noble marriage with Valen didn't free her from the stigma of shame, and all the aristocrats treated her like the worst curse in the world. Mary knew that no one would care about the life of the young woman, which is why she confidently stated that the only owner of the Valen mansion was Lady Josephina. An uncomfortable silence seized the room, after which Kana demanded that the maid hand her the water jug. Without waiting for her request to be fulfilled, the young woman seized the dishware from the maid's hands. Casting a quick glance at the jug, she noticed that there was a little water. And in the next instant, the young woman upturned the dishware over Mary's head, pouring ice-cold water on the maid. Proudly raising her chin, Kana declared that maids could not be so arrogant. While Mary was in shock, Kana shouted for the maids to bring the whip to her bedroom. The young woman snatched the instrument from the hands of another maid, alarming the entire staff. With a slight flick of the whip, Kana ordered Mary to expose her calves for the chastisement. Mary stood petrified, her face flushed with rage. But she didn't know how to act in those circumstances. Unable to bear the attention, the servants began to scream about their importance in this house, as they had been there longer than Kana and that Mrs. Josefina trusted them. The expressive behavior did not shake Kana's determination. The young woman reprimanded Mary and reminded her that she was a mere maid who dared to splash her lady with water. The young woman pushed the whip against the maid's chest and promised that she would re-educate her, as it was a duchess's duty. Kana struck again with the whip. Her threat was stronger than the previous one. Now she swore to punish the entire staff if Mary did not accept the chastisement. The maid could barely contain her emotions. She couldn't believe she was being bullied by some young lady. Kana didn't want to wait any longer and demanded that the maid reflect on the fate of the other maidens. A little while later, Mary grasped the hem of her dress and lifted it, deciding to silently accept the punishment. Although her face burned with fury, Kana noticed the maid's fear, but she was concerned if Mary had guessed the changes in her. The young woman looked at the whip. Suddenly, a voice in her mind, that of her mother from another life, reminded her that any punishment must be done correctly. Kana was sure she had to defend herself, which is why her hand with the whip rose. In the next instant, the maid received a blow, but she bravely held back from screaming. After the first hit, the young woman did not stop and dealt several more. The maid remained standing and endured the blows. But then Mary could not withstand it, and with tears in her eyes, she acknowledged her guilt before the Duchess. The maid fell to her knees. Kana demanded an apology for daring to splash her with water and striking her in the face to wake her up. Mary called her lady again, but upon seeing the young woman's threatening gaze, she began to excuse herself and promised to call her Madam. From then on, the young woman threw the whip to the ground and promised that the punishment would be much more severe next time. Kana sat on the bed. Such a tense morning drained her of much strength, but still she shouted at the servants to leave the room. A thud was heard in the hallway, and Mary stood frozen in the doorway. Kana looked towards the sound. She now understood that a punishment wouldn't change the ingrained habits of this property. Now she regretted the reverse exchange, as Li Juhua did not manage to obtain any status in this mansion. When Kana lived the life of Li Juhua, she did manage to improve that young woman's life. Hard work allowed her to graduate from a prestigious university and become a traditional medicine doctor. But a tight schedule did not prevent her from starting a relationship with a kind guy. However, Li Juhua did the opposite for Kana's life. She turned it into an unbearable trial. Now Kana Addis was not only the despicable daughter in the Addis family, but also the mockery of the Valentino home, even though she was once an aristocrat. No one considered her noble, which is why every reception or guest visit at the Addis estate ended with an endless torrent of curses behind Kana. Every meeting of aristocrats ended with the nobles looking at her with disdain. That's why Li Juhua was not prepared for such a life. During one of the social dinners, everything changed, as at that moment Duke Valentino visited the Addis estate. As soon as Li Juhua saw the man at the threshold, she fell into the cursed whirlwind of falling in love. Kana's memories ended when the noise in the hallway turned into a horrifying scream demanding that they open the door immediately. Josefina Elster burst into the room with several assistants. The lady was outraged by Kana's behavior, as Mary had told her everything. The countess scrutinized the young woman with an arrogant gaze. She waved her fan and asked Kana to show the maids what obedience was with her own example. Kana already knew that the countess was the stepmother of Dukes Silvio and Valentino, and the true owner of this estate. She was annoyed because Kana had ignored the order and had not gone to greet the lady of the house at breakfast. The young woman remained calm, but just the fact that she was demanded such behavior put her on alert. Li Juhua had become a prisoner of the situation and obeyed the countess's orders, which is why she attended every meal and greeted the lady. Over time, the countess showed more authority and even prohibited leaving the estate, so Li Juhua followed the whimsical demands. Kana could not be angry with the young woman, as she was probably trying to earn some love in this house. However, the consequences of such actions now filled Kana with sadness, as she found herself in a complicated situation. The girl understood that Li Juhua's past decisions could not be fixed soon. Her old habits had to be eradicated, and she could not please those who treated her poorly to avoid it. Since childhood, she had to understand how to live correctly, even despite the criticisms of the Addis family. Kana admitted that she hadn't forgotten the demand of the lady, but then with a little determination, she announced that she no longer wanted to continue submitting to silly requirements. Her future should not suffer because of the past. Duchess Josephina Elster became Sylvian's stepmother when the boy was only 10 years old, but after the death of the previous duke, she managed to maintain her position as the lady of the castle. The duchess was sure of her superiority, so she didn't hesitate to cause any harm to Kana and Li Juhua. When Josephine heard Kana's bold statement, she did not believe it. No one in this house had dared to disobey her before. Kana got up from the bed, repeated her stance to the duchess, and did not back down. Josephine was confused. Just a few days ago, the young woman acted like the most loyal servant willing to fulfill any request. But now Kana's eyes shone with bravery and determination. The woman suddenly approached and hit her with the fan, demanding that she respect the customs of her home while being the duke's wife. Kana pushed the fan away from her face and reminded the duchess that family rules and hers were different things. The duchess's expression amused Kana. She laughed at how the woman tried to appear as an important member of the family, but such an attitude only embarrassed the Valentinos. The young woman's words surprised the countess, who immediately ordered that the rude one be arrested. The assistants rushed towards the girl, grabbing her hands and preventing her from backing away. Mary brought the whip to the lady, as she was furious and determined to teach Kana manners. The young woman expected this approach from the countess, as only with force could she momentarily hold power in the state. Mary adjusted Kana's skirt so that the whip would hit the girl's legs. The girl abruptly pulled her hands from the maid's dress, startling the woman. Kana raised the hem of her dress, lifted it, and defiantly shouted to the countess that she was ready to play by the rules of this house. Such brave behavior aggravated Josephine's anger, and her burning fury grew. Now she wanted to teach the girl the proper lessons even harder. The situation amused Kana. The girl bowed to the lady and smilingly asked to demonstrate the disciplinary teachings. The servant seated Kana on the floor so that the girl would not escape while the countess, waving the whip, approached. The girl laughed upon seeing the countess justifying noble status, as the education of a daughter-in-law is given through punishments. But then Kana remembered that Duke Valentino would approve of this educational method, a phrase that terrified the woman. To hide her fear, the countess waved the whip and began the punishment. A loud crack of the whip echoed through the room. But Kana made no sound. The countess lost control and began to hit the girl's legs with the whip without rest. But Kana gripped the hem of her dress tighter and began to endure the pain. Many maids observed the punishment from the hallway, but they did not dare to intervene in the process despite the new blows. Kana did not dare to scream or show her pain, so the countess's aides were surprised by her composure. Although the girl's suffering entertained Mary, she did not hide her malicious smile. More blows were heard in the room. Kana understood that everyone was watching her, but she was indifferent. No one dared to stop Josephine. The prolonged punishment frightened Mary as she saw the girl's injuries. Kana held on with all her strength. Now the entire staff saw that the girl had undergone unexpected changes in just one night. Her legs were too injured, but after a few more blows, blood marks appeared on them. The countess stopped to catch her breath, although inside she burned with rage at the fact that her daughter-in-law was not going to give up or admit her guilt like so many times before. Kana did not remain silent for long, but her phrase surprised the woman. When she tried to acknowledge her guilt, Josephine smiled, wickedly convinced that she had made her daughter-in-law admit to making a mistake, but Kana did not give up and firmly stated that she was only guilty of allowing the servants and the duchess to abuse her life. The girl reasoned that she should not spend every day in the company of their countess. Kana proudly raised her shoulders and declared that she was the owner of the castle, and that Josephine was only a guest staying there. The staff did not expect such impertinence. Josephine began to suffocate with fury at feeling belittled and called a mere guest. The daughter-in-law remained calm. She knew that according to noble laws, the estate always belonged only to the new duke and his wife, not to the widow of the previous count. Kana advised the duchess to submit and try to live in a separate house, but that humiliation plunged her into deep confusion. Josephine recalled how, as a young aristocrat, she had ended up married to Sylvian's father, then attracting the attention of other duchesses. She was a famous noble, so that at any dinner, she easily received thank you notes or invitations to events, and she was not short of expensive gifts, while Sylvian's father lived. That's why every aristocratic meeting became more interesting, with the presence of Josephine. Suddenly, the woman imagined that there would no longer be meetings with influential people, and Kana would take the host position at the table. The servants, whom Josephine had trained so diligently to be loyal, would begin to attend to Kana and receive gratitude for it. Once all that happened, Josephine would be left with only loneliness and lost influence among the nobility. The woman regained her composure, her thoughts still filled with terror, but she tried to maintain a confident posture in front of her daughter-in-law. However, her efforts proved futile. Josephine grabbed Kana by the neck of her dress and began to shake her. Instantly, the countess froze as the woman's body staggered and began to fall. Kana lay still on the ground. The room fell silent, but no servant rushed to help the Duke's wife. The girl breathed heavily, but opened her eyes slightly and looked at the maids. Recap Manhwa Josephine ordered all the servants, and Josefina was just a guest staying there. The servants didn't expect such impudence. Josefina began to suffocate with rage, feeling belittled and called just a simple guest. The daughter-in-law was calm, knowing that according to noble laws, the estate always belonged only to the new duke and his wife, not to the widow of the previous count. Kana advised the duchess to submit and try to live in a separate house, but that humiliation plunged her into deep confusion. Josefina recalled how, as a young aristocrat, she had ended up married to Sylviane's father. Back then, she drew the attention of other duchesses. She was a famous noble, so at any dinner, she easily received thank you notes or invitations to events. Expensive gifts were never lacking. While Sylviane's father was alive, that's why every aristocratic meeting became more interesting. With Josephine's presence, suddenly the woman imagined that there would be no more encounters with influential people, and Kana would take her place at the table. The servants, whom Josephine had trained so diligently to be loyal, would start attending to Kana and receive gratitude for it. Once all that happened, Josephine would be left with only loneliness and the lost influence among the nobility. The woman regained her composure. Her thoughts were still filled with terror, but she tried to maintain a confident posture in front of her daughter-in-law. However, her efforts proved useless. Josephine grabbed Kana by the collar of her dress and started shaking her. Instantly, the countess froze as the woman's body swayed and began to fall. Kana lay motionless on the floor. The room fell silent, but no servant rushed to help the Duke's wife. The girl struggled to breathe, but opened her eyes slightly and looked at the maids. Josephine ordered all the servants not to help her until she acknowledged all the blame for the insults directed at the lady of the estate. Kana began to lose consciousness. The room darkened as the countess headed for the exit and ordered that no one visit Kana. In the Valentino Palace, night fell deeply, and all the lights in the building were already off. After the incident of the day, Josefina was still angry, and even though she was in her quarters, she was shouting threats against Kana. The woman was furious for allowing Sylviane to marry the illegitimate child of the Addis family instead of the expected one with the second imperial princess. Josefina knew that her title of countess was just a false title she held by force, but the lost opportunity to join the imperial family constantly troubled her. The countess imagined again that Kana would become the owner of the palace, and she would lose all her power even though right now, as a countess, she had no assets or money. But with Kana's new behavior, she would definitely lose everything. Rage clouded her mind. She only thought about how Kana wouldn't survive the night. After falling at her feet, the servants reported that the injuries were very serious and the daughter-in-law had a high fever. Josefina decided to leave things as they were and pretend she had nothing to do with the injuries. The countess smiled wickedly, waiting for everything to take the turn she desired. The woman lay down on the sofa. Her future plans relaxed her, so she began to dream about how after Kana's death, she would push Sylviane to reunite with the imperial princess. A knock sounded at the door. The assistant reported the Duke Valentino's visit. This scared the woman. The door creaked open and a man entered silently. Josefina was terrified. She looked at Sylviane, but feared that he had come alone to her chambers. The countess jumped off the sofa and approached her son to greet him. Her thoughts were filled with worry about the incident with Kana that might have caught the Duke's attention, so she had to come up with an excuse. Sylviane silently passed by his stepmother, a behavior that increased the woman's unease. The man didn't respond to her questions about the late visit. He simply sat on one of the sofas after regaining his composure. Josefina kindly offered her son some tea and assured him he could stay as long as he wanted in his chambers. The young man's silence drew attention, so the woman began to laugh nervously and insisted once again that he drink the tea. The atmosphere in the room changed abruptly. Duke Valentino remained seated in silence. After waiting a moment, the man stated that today he had heard strange news. This left his stepmother stunned. The woman curled up on the sofa, fearing that Kana held an important place in her adoptive son's life. That was why he had come to get rid of her. But Josefina relaxed instantly upon hearing Sylviane mention that only today he had learned about the need to attend the birthday of the second princess. The woman began to smile, glad that now the conversation didn't revolve around her hateful daughter-in-law, and she could push the Duke to get closer to the imperial family. Josefina proudly announced that Princess Lilin was personally interested in Duke Valentino. That's why in her role as mother, she promised her visit to the birthday. The Duke remained motionless in front of his stepmother. He felt there were hidden motives behind that action as he observed her closely. Sylviane asked in a cold tone what right she had to promise something in his name. Josefina lost the ability to speak. The Duke had never been so cold with her. Sylviane decided to punish her arrogance and demanded an answer. Countess Elster had the right to decide for the Duke what he should do. The woman anxiously clasped her wrists and whispered nervously that she was just fulfilling the princess's request, who hadn't seen the Duke in a long time and missed their conversations. Sylviane was furious at his stepmother's attitude of plotting behind his back and threatened that Countess Elster must accompany the princess if she had the right to do so. The man got up from the sofa without waiting for his stepmother's response and threw out the phrase that the conversation was over. The Duke headed for the door, but Josefina was so scared that she didn't even turn to him. She was so nervous that she gripped her hands tightly until the skin cut at her wrists. But as soon as the door closed behind the Duke, she managed to relax a bit. In Kana's room, there were no servants, so she spent the day lying on the floor and woke up when the moonlight came through the window. Her body was so weak that she trembled. Kana tried to sit up, supporting her hands on the ground, but her head kept spinning, preventing her from gauging how long she had been unconscious. She felt her body burning, so she took a quick glance at her legs. Injured, and was shocked at the severity of the injuries, although her dress concealed part of the damage. Seeing the amount of blood, Kana understood that recovery would take her a long time. She reached for the hem of her dress and attempted to separate the clothing stuck to her skin. Upon inspecting all the injuries, she was horrified to realize that her inner strength was not strong enough to have allowed them to do this to her. Her head spun again and she fell back to the floor. Fatigue was shutting her eyes on their own, preventing her from moving. Although her body had no strength, her mind analyzed the situation and proposed a solution. She had to treat the wounds, to avoid infections and worse consequences. A thought crossed her mind that she could die, and that fear made her sit up again. On the floor of the room, Kana understood that the cunning countess wanted her dead. That's why no doctor visited her all day. Gathering her strength, Kana began to crawl slowly toward the bed. The rage at seeing that the people in this palace were willing to commit repulsive acts motivated her to not give up and keep moving forward. Grabbing onto the blanket, Kana reached the edge of the bed and almost managed to climb up. Now she had gone to war with the local norms. But no one in this palace would expect her death, as she would heal herself. Through the window, the full moon shone. Kana found a bottle of alcohol in the room and used a sheet to make bandages, with which she began to treat her wounds. She decided to apply alcohol to the wound so that the alcohol it contained could disinfect the deep cuts on her legs. However, before doing so, she noticed something outside the window of the room. Moving the wine bottle aside, Kana observed the garden illuminated intensely by the moonlight. In front of the window stood a huge tree that looked very familiar. Slowly overcoming the distance to the window, she stepped into the garden and immediately checked that the scent of the tree would be a great help. She remembered that the tree in the garden was called cinnamon, and that in Korea, it was a medicinal plant. According to her knowledge, any part of this tree was useful for creating medicines that effectively healed various bruises. Finding such a plant was an unexpected miracle, since in the wild, cinnamon only grows in the east and the Valerio Palace is in the west. Kana meditated, trying to recall something from Li Juhua's memories from years ago. The countess had the hobby of collecting eastern plants in the family garden, which is why she forced Li Juhua to plant cinnamon. That day, Li Ju tried to improve her relationship with her mother-in-law and advised her to care for the plants with manna stones. Otherwise, the western climate would kill the tree. Fragments of memories faded. Kana realized that even caring for the tree wasn't appropriate, although the idea of using manna stones was excellent. The young woman's spirits lifted. Such luck would come in very handy, and she could prepare a good remedy for her cuts. Gathering a few leaves, Kana crushed them with a bottle to make an ointment. Evaluating the result, the young woman decided that this ointment would be enough to alleviate the first symptoms of the infection. First, she sprayed alcohol from the bottle on the wound to disinfect it, but the burning sensation upon contact with the alcohol on the cuts was unbearable, causing Kana to let out a prolonged scream. After overcoming the pain, the young woman applied the ointment to the wounds, and with the bandages she had made herself, she wrapped them, pushing the tray with medications aside. She fell back down, onto the bed, completely drained. It was very late at night, and the day had not brought Kana anything good. She feared that the remedies would not be enough, and if the body swap hadn't happened, she wouldn't have found herself in such a dangerous situation. The young woman began to dream that if she were still in Korea, she would have taken the countess to the police, and the hospital doctors would have taken care of her treatment. Although now she wished she at least had a small first aid kit with good medical supplies nearby. Kana recalled the mother of Li Juhua. While they were in different bodies, she had already gotten used to the new family. So in such difficult moments, she always turned to her mother's advice. After resting a bit, Kana decided that the situation wasn't worth her tears, so she had to concentrate all her strength on correcting the mistakes. The young woman understood that despite her desire to return, she could no longer do so the only way out was to rebuild her life. Silvio arrived at his chambers when one of the stewards informed him of the incident between the countess and his wife. The man listened silently to the report, but the steward wondered what to do with the wife since the Duchess had ordered no help be provided. Silvio listened to the assistant but reminded him that Countess Elster handled all internal matters of the fief. As he stepped away from the steward, he implied that the conversation was over. Silvio headed to the office. Joselina's suspicions were accurate. In fact, he couldn't care less what happened to Kana on his property, and his cold attitude toward the young woman meant a death sentence if she decided to stay in the Valentin family. In the Valentin house, a new day dawned. One of the maids was carrying a tray of food to Kana's chambers. When Mary stopped her, Mary asked the servants if the food they brought daily to the Duke's wife's chambers had been consumed. Mary was alert. 10 days had passed since the incident with the whip, but only empty plates came from Cana's chambers, not a dead body which worried the maid. The Countess was waiting at the door for news of her daughter-in-law's death. Joselina was constantly interested in whether any servant offered help to Cana since her orders could not be disobeyed. So one of the Countess's orders was for Mary to immediately inform her if the good news of her daughter-in-law's death was fulfilled. This also happened today. The maids came out with empty plates. Mary was growing tired of waiting, since the problem that Recap Manhwa had brought upon herself was for daring to punish the maid. Mary Goldian's mood improved when she decided that at night she would visit Cana to check how bad she was and when she would die. Suddenly a scream echoed down the hallway and a frightened maid ran out of Cana's chambers. The maid was trying to catch her breath after running, while Mary reprimanded the importance of not running down the hallways or bothering Countess Elster. Noticing the scared expression of her assistant, Mary suddenly was glad that Cana had died. After all, the assistant didn't know how to react to the older maid's joy, who insisted on telling her everything in detail, but all of Mary's feelings faded when behind her Cana's voice sounded with a slight cheer. The young woman appeared in the hallway alive, and her lively appearance surprised Mary. The maid couldn't believe that so many days had passed and that the beaten young woman was now completely healthy. Despite the fact that the injuries had been very dangerous, Cana smiled shyly. She found it amusing that the maid had lost the ability to speak, but she didn't react to her appearance. Mary observed the young woman. It irritated her that she now looked even better than before the punishment. Cana didn't wait for the servants to react and announced that as the owner of the castle, she could not ignore that her subjects wished for her death, demanding that they bring her the whip. In the doctor's consultation, chaos reigned. Countess Elster was throwing objects and angrily demanding a confession. The doctor swore that all the medications were in their place and that no one could have stolen them to help Cana. The woman screamed hysterically that it was impossible to recover without external help, much less to accumulate so much strength before going to the doctors. She found her in the hallway, lying on the floor and beaten with whip marks. Since then, she hadn't stopped worrying. Then the Countess tried to wake the maid, but her injuries terrified Josefina. One of the maids reported that Mrs. Cana had punished Mary for wishing her death. That confession shocked Josefina. Now she feared for her own life. The woman was angry at the situation without an exit, but she couldn't stay paralyzed without acting. The Duchess shouted at the doctors, but she turned around and headed to Cana's room to confirm the rumors for herself. Cana was in the garden when in her room, screams were heard and the Duchess appeared accompanied by several maids. Cana's good appearance surprised the Countess, but what worried her was how her daughter-in-law had managed to enter the sick room and steal medications. Cana's wounds were still bandaged, and the Duchess noticed it, but laughed at the absurd idea that in her state she could have left her room to collect medicinal herbs that the Countess had gathered especially. The situation entertained Cana, and she boldly asked her mother-in-law if she really was not glad that her daughter-in-law had recovered her health. Finally, Josefina understood that she was now at a disadvantage and agreed to pretend asking her daughter-in-law to inform her more about her condition and to show her character. The Countess demanded from Cana the reason why she had punished the maid without her permission. Cana attentively observed the woman, but did not give her an immediate answer. After a moment, Cana adjusted her dress and calmly responded that Mary was the one who wished for her death. She told her what had happened in the hallway before Mary saw her. So the maid's joy at the prospect of the Duke's wife's possible death enraged her. That's why she punished her. The reproach aimed at the Countess did not go unnoticed, so Josefina began to worry. The Countess knew that the maid was guilty of not having waited and being happy too soon, but one must always remember that Cana could have died from her illness, but before that one must remember that, although despicable, she was part of the noble society. The Countess devised a plan. She could not allow Cana to seriously think that they wished for her death. Cana asked indifferently if she had acted correctly, but the Duchess remembered that Mary had served in that house for several decades. The daughter-in-law did not intend to give up. She affirmed that any servant who wished for the lady's death was a very dangerous person. Suddenly, Cana confessed that if the Duchess did not allow Mary to be expelled from the palace, she herself would have to leave. But those words only caused joy in Josefina. The Countess looked at the young woman who sat hunched in the shadow of the tree and did not seem to belong to a noble family. Cana's condition did not impress Josefina, and dismissing it, the woman wished for her daughter-in-law to leave the estate. If that's what she wanted, the Countess concluded her visit and along with the servants headed for the exit of the room. But Cana promised her that at dawn she would leave the Valentine estate. A loud slam was heard, after which the garden fell silent. But now Cana felt even better, since all the following steps would be taken on her own. After sitting for a while in the garden, the young woman understood that her plan had worked, and that Josefina had expelled her from the house. Looking at the empty room, Cana decided that for her expulsion from the palace to be credible, she only had to speak with the Duke. The young woman decided that Sylvian must support her divorce proposal, since according to Li Juhua's diary, her behavior had provoked a cold attitude in the man toward her. The sunset was almost over. Kana got up from the bench, and while her soul was filled with determination, she headed to the meeting with the Duke. The main building of the estate was empty, as Kana walked down the luxuriously decorated hallway toward the man's chambers, and before entering, the young woman politely knocked on the door, announcing her visit. She didn't expect a response, but after a while a voice invited her in. Although the young woman clearly sensed a smile in the response, Kana suddenly opened the door and almost shouted that she had come with an important matter, but she couldn't utter a word. Her eyes were fascinated by the Duke. Sylvian Valentino wore a light nightgown over his bare body. The man noticed the young woman's reaction and asked why she had appeared before him in the middle of the night. Without waiting for her response, the Duke called her by name again. Kana was closely observing the man's beautiful features, while he tried to figure out what she needed at such a late hour. The young woman didn't know how to react. She felt very embarrassed for having seen him in that state. But then she composed herself, remembering that she was in front of Sylvian Valentino, a terrible person whose body she should not admire. Stopping looking at the man, the young woman reminded herself that appearance is just a shell, and she shouldn't get distracted by it. She knew not only from the diary, but also from ancient stories, that Sylvian Valentino's soul was dark as night, and his attitude toward his own wife was neither respectful nor caring, despite knowing the terrible injuries his wife had suffered. Closing the door, the young woman began the dialogue by saying that the Duke should know about the incident that had occurred days earlier in the palace. Kana confessed that the Duke's stepmother had tried to kill her, but the man scoffed that the punishment with the whip couldn't kill. That cold reaction to the terrible events shocked Kana. Clenching her hands into fists, the young woman firmly declared that the injuries caused by the stepmother did not receive proper treatment, so they could have killed her. The man sat on the bed. He wasn't interested in the conversation, so he asked his wife to explain the reason why she had brought up the incident. Kana was furious. She was the Duke's wife, who could have died because of her mother-in-law's revenge. But her husband took no action when he learned of it. The man furiously kicked the carpet and confessed that he was completely indifferent to what had happened. The girl was stunned. She had seen the Duke's expression many times in Li Juhua's memories, but now she was facing him in person. The Duke had a pleasant look. His voice was always friendly, and a smile never left his lips. But the most dangerous thing about his face was the utterly bored gaze that could repel anyone. The Duke didn't understand what she wanted since she was alive and healthy, which surprised Kana greatly. But such was the nature of that man that he wouldn't care even if she were mortally wounded before him. Now Kana was even more devastated since Li Juhua had grown up among people who loved her. But in the end, she fell in love with someone like that, suffering for years for that love. Kana only wished that Li Juhua's parents would not find out about what had happened to their daughter. Kana moved closer to the bed and declared that, although the marriage was contractual, it didn't invalidate that their union had to fulfill the conditions of a normal marriage. Standing in front of him, the girl couldn't resist and shouted, demanding at least a minimum of respect toward her at dawn. Kana left the Valenino property as promised, but upon arriving at the Addis house, a guard ordered her to leave, because by order of the Duke Valenino's wife was prohibited from entering the house. The gates of the estate closed, and the guard ordered her to return to the Valenino house. Kana with her suitcase remained by the gate, although she knew this would happen. She still hoped for a different outcome. She kicked a stone furiously and began to lament that such orders were excessive for her father. Now that she knew her father had completely abandoned her, she understood that Li Juhua had not been at the family home either after the wedding. Putting aside thoughts about the order, Kana began to think about how to simply obtain her father's consent for divorce. Looking at her hair, the girl wondered if changing her hair color would change his attitude toward her. The black color had long been associated with catastrophe and failure, therefore, it was impossible to change the attitude toward prejudice. Long ago, when the southern continent still existed, it was called the Magical Land. At that time, the whole world was in balance and time passed in peace and tranquility. But suddenly, everything changed when the black fog arrived, covering all the lands of the continent. The power of the black fog was so great that any living being died instantly as soon as it entered it, and one morning, the entire world of the southern continent was dyed black, forcing all humans to abandon their homes and homeland. Those who survived and moved to other lands could establish a new state called the Western Continent, which has existed for 1,000 years. However, the Western Continent did not become a completely safe place, and in some parts the black fog still appeared. The fog has the property of manifesting different objects in a time period. Strange objects and huge stones emerged from it. But there was something more that terrified everyone over time. Monsters began to emerge from the fog. Such creatures had not existed anywhere before. But with the arrival of the fog, they also came uncontrollable creatures, omnivorous predators. Everything happened quickly. It was enough for the black fog to come into contact with a person's skin, after which the infected person would quickly begin to lose their sanity. Rage would take over them, and they would turn into an authentic beast. The worst part was that after the transformation, the only thing the monsters desired was to exterminate humanity. The infected had black hair and eyes, which is why Kana became a victim of ancient legends, as her appearance was similar to that of the infected. Because of this, any public appearance or meeting with other people was always accompanied by scornful looks from others, which was also what she received from Duke Valentino. That's why when last night she expressed her discontent about not being able to endure the disrespectful treatment any longer, then Kana told Sylvian that as Countess Elster, she had been expelled, she would return to her family home. The girl's visit did not surprise him too much, but he was interested that she had decided to leave. Sylvian laughed, since as husband and wife his wife couldn't live in separate houses from her husband. But the man did not argue. In the end, he was indifferent to how they lived. He sat back down on the bed when Kana announced she would return to her family home to obtain Duke Addis's consent for the divorce. In return, she received only a mocking smile and the promise that Sylvian would wait for the consent for the divorce. The memories of the previous night angered her even more, so she kicked stones along the fence. She realized that she hadn't made the proper impression on the Duke, and that he was simply mocking her attempts to change anything. Just weeks ago, she had knelt before him begging him not to leave, and now suddenly, she had decided on drastic changes. Kana threatened the void, vowing that this time, she would go through with it to the end and they would get divorced. But upon looking at the closed gates of the Addis estate, she reduced her intensity, for now she couldn't even enter her own house. The girl laughed at the thought that she could try to jump over the wall and fall to her knees before her father asking for permission. The family carriage approached the estate, which made Kana pay attention to the arriving guests. The coachman stopped the horses to turn the carriage toward the gate. Then he shouted to the guards announcing that the master had returned and demanded they open the gates. Kana watched the situation closely when suddenly the gates behind her swung open wide. The carriage stopped next to the girl, and from it, Callan Addis, the second son of the family, emerged. Upon inspecting his brother, Kana noticed that there was also a young woman in the carriage whose face was covered by a veil. Callan got out of the carriage. He hadn't expected to see his stepsister at the estate, and his behavior was cautious. He demanded an explanation of why the Duke Valentino's wife was on the Addis property. Kana was shocked that her brother referred to her by her status as the Duke's wife, and remembered that he didn't want anything to do with her. Before meeting Kana, Callan, Addis was returning to the family estate from the capital city. He was very exhausted after a failed conversation with the new doctor. Callan turned to his younger sister Lucy and asked her to rest that day, while he continued searching for a new doctor. The girl remained silent, which alerted her brother, but still he confessed that there was no hope left and that they must stop searching. Callan felt defeated upon realizing that even his sister had begun to lose faith, and she herself was asking to give up. Lucy Addis was the youngest in the family, and at 7 years old, she was diagnosed with a very rare disease that no one had heard of. Even the members of the Addis family could not ignore the peculiarities of the girl, so they dedicated themselves to gossiping about her condition. The most prominent doctors on the continent could do nothing. They only advised sending her to a temple. Cullen did everything possible to help his sister, as sending the girl to a temple meant they had given up. He worried that with each passing day, support diminished, and results did not come despite all the consultations they had. And so when he was already quite upset, he found his sister at the door, whom he hadn't seen for a long time. Lucy was interested in what was happening outside, so when she peeked through the window of the carriage, she was startled to see Kana. The girl immediately hid inside the carriage, but it was already too late. Cullen and Kana saw the little one, which distracted them from the imminent argument. Kana began to watch the girl, while she tried to cover her face with a veil. She approached to examine her and determine what was bothering her, but instantly, a strong arm pushed her aside. Cullen pulled her away from the group and threatened that if she dared to disclose what she had just seen, he would leave her no chance for a good life. That tone didn't faze her. She just wanted to know how successful the treatment was. Kana demanded answers from Cullen about the progress of the treatment, the results obtained, and the doctors who were treating her while the boy was stunned. The girl said she could help Lucy if she stayed at the Addis castle for a while. Such confidence infuriated Callan, as all the doctors on the Western continent had not been able to cure the girl, so Kana should not promise the impossible. The boy was losing his patience. He couldn't allow them to mock his hopes. Kana waited for her brother to finish shouting and moved closer to him. The girl demanded that he gather his strength, stop being overly emotional, and consider the possibility that he still had opportunities to help his younger sister. Callan stood still. His sister's calm behavior and confident voice seemed to indicate that she really could help with the treatment. The brother clenched his fist. It was difficult for him to admit that he was asking for help from his sister, who had been a curse to the family since her birth, but now he had no alternative. The family entered the house. The steward informed that the other family members had gone to the imperial dinner. The assistant collected Kana's luggage while the girl informed her brother that for the treatment it was necessary to prepare special tools. The girl handed her brother the instructions to make medical needles of a specific size and in the necessary quantity. But Kana insisted that the work be done by a magical master who should use the highest quality magic stones. The Recap Manhwa brother looked at her with evident skepticism. He simply couldn't understand how a needle alone could cure. Sighing, Callan decided that the needle option would be better than sending Lucy to the temple. In the Western continent, The temple was the center of divine spirit that purifies everything through the world tree. But in the temple, the emperor's laws were not applied, which meant that no one assumed responsibility for the negative consequences. You couldn't enter or exit freely from the temple, so it was not possible to send Lucy to a place without discipline or common sense. After accepting it, Kaylin decided to try Kana's methods to heal her, since as long as there was a chance of not sending Lucy to the temple, he would use them. The brother guided Kana to Lucy's room, trying to ask her if she had studied medicine anywhere other than her childhood hobby of alchemy. There was no common sense. After accepting it, Kaylin decided to try Kana's methods to cure her, since as long as there was a chance not to send Lucy to the temple, he would use them. The brother guided Kana to Lucy's room, trying to ask if she had studied medicine anywhere else besides her childhood hobby of alchemy. The girl proudly stated that alchemy was related to healing, so she made sure she had enough knowledge to treat the girl, although she didn't tell the brother about her travels between bodies. Kana openly lied to her brother, claiming that her alchemy was a new process, because if she told him about her work in the hospital while in another body, he would take it as madness. Without waiting for the brother, she went ahead to meet Lucy and learn all the symptoms of the illness. Kaylin watched the girl. He didn't believe her words. But seeing how she walked with confidence, he understood that she was no longer the same person who was always scared. She seemed like a complete stranger. Even though 7 years had passed since Kana last lived in the family home, she shouldn't have changed so much. When the brother and sister entered Lucy's room, the frightened girl hid under the blanket. Kana got closer to the bed and noticed that as she did so, the girl under the blanket began to tremble, so she had to promise not to do anything just yet. The girl didn't want to come out, so Kana began telling her that with the right treatment, Lucy would feel better. Kana acknowledged that she had treated patients with a similar illness to Lucy's, so she could promise a safe recovery. A noise was heard under the blanket, but Lucy didn't rush to come out of her hiding place. After waiting a moment, the girl finally lowered the blanket and looked at Kana with a sad look. Kaylin was surprised that Kana showed no reaction, since all the doctors were always shocked to see that. The girl asked Lucy to close her eyes and give her a moment to examine her face. Kaylin watched from the side as Kana performed the medical examination, but still tensed when the girl touched her younger sister's face. However, the calmness of the young woman troubled Kaylin more than her treatment methods, as she was too calm. The girl carefully examined Lucy's face, trying not to scare the little one. Kana turned to the brother to tell her all the symptoms that the girl had before getting sick. Suddenly, the young woman asked if Lucy had had a cough or fever, which made Kaylin worry even more. He remembered that a few days ago Lucy had fallen into a pond and caught a cold, but the illness passed quite quickly. Kana understood that after that incident, they hadn't managed to cure Lucy completely. The girl began to question Lucy about whether she had hearing problems. But Kaylin tried to explain by himself that the girl didn't show such symptoms. Kana demanded the brother to be quiet since Lucy had to answer. Upon hearing that authoritative tone, Kaylin stood still, but he didn't want to argue and fell silent after thinking for a moment. Lucy confessed that she had hearing problems. Her words hurt Kaylin as if she hadn't told him. It meant that she didn't trust him. After finishing the examination, Kana confirmed that she hadn't been wrong with the diagnosis. The brother and sister left Lucy's room. The girl stated that the illness she had was curable, so they needed to prepare the necessary tools. However, Kaylin seemed not to listen to his sister. He couldn't understand how she had skillfully discovered the truth about the girl, something that she hadn't even told him. The brother asked Kana to explain how she had managed to find that out, but from her experience as a doctor, she knew that all patients hide something. Kaylin pointed out that not only patients hide secrets and suggested that he expected more information from his sister. The girl remembered how, as a child, he used to mock her and asked her to do tasks that he himself had prepared, but worst of all was that back then Kaylin had told her not to come near him, even though now he demands the opposite. The girl hid nothing. She simply acknowledged that if she had a serious illness, she wouldn't complain about additional symptoms. Kaylin tried to uncover a lie in her confession, but his efforts yielded no results. However, he was surprised when his sister mentioned the deceit from the doctors. Kana was upset, because despite the visits to the doctor, the girl remained sick. The girl concluded that Lucy didn't mention all her problems because everyone would take her for a liar, which shocked Kaylin. The boy tried to defend himself, as he truly did everything possible to make Lucy feel comfortable at home, but Kana knew that wasn't enough. Kaylin had always been someone supported since childhood. That's why he would never understand the life of someone who suffers from widespread disdain. Kana hinted that Kaylin didn't live alone in the house, so the girl born from a maid would always be under observation. Since even if Kaylin tried to be nice to Lucy, he would never manage to change the perspective of the other family members. Therefore, any member of the Addis family who was behind would always look down on not only Lucy but also Kaylin, especially his mother's sister, and brother, who would be the main annoyances at home. Unlike Kaylin, Lucy perceived the true acts of those people. After such a direct monologue, Kaylin didn't know what he could say to defend the Addis family. The girl didn't insist anymore, fully understanding that he would never have realized the true nature of his family by himself. However, looking at him closely, she was glad that over time, Kalen had changed and now showed interest in his younger blood sister, whom he had never treated. That way, not even when she was weak or sick. He normally watched her suffering from a distance, even though he tried to be kind. It was all a facade that allowed him to feel satisfied with the humiliations he devised. But at any moment, the mask would crack, and Kalen would let out phrases that meant Kana shouldn't be in public places, especially when she was sick. In those moments, there was no way to stop him, and for a long time he continued with hurtful words, demanding that she lock herself in her room until she was completely recovered. The sad memories came to an end. Now, Kana was no longer a child, so it made no sense to suffer so much over that, although deep down, it hurt her that Kalen had treated her like a pest, and now suddenly tried to act like a decent older brother. Approaching the table, Kana decided that now it would be her who would use her brother to prepare her living space in that house. The girl asked to have the library open to study the necessary books for her healing. She analyzed the symptoms she had learned from Lucy with those described in the manuals. On the Western continent, there was a viral infection that caused facial paralysis in people. There were medications for treatment, but finding them was an extremely difficult task. Reviewing several documents, Kana understood that the medications available in Korea were also on the Western continent. Therefore, she could definitely use her knowledge of Oriental medicine, although Kana still didn't know all the complications of the viral infection. She suspected that the treatment would be difficult and prolonged, so for a time she could stay in the country house. Kalen didn't distract her from work, but his distrustful gaze never left her. The boy spied on what Kana was studying. He was intrigued if she was really capable of mastering the medicine of the Eastern continent, as the Eastern continent had been discovered by a navigator just 10 years ago when the first ships reached an unknown coast. That's why knowledge about the new lands was still not completely reliable, but the basis of Oriental medicine is the study of herbs and the preparation of special infusions. After finishing with the books, Kana understood that her knowledge from another life coincided with what this world had managed to discover by investigating the Eastern continent. Although traditional medicine advances rapidly, there is always a risk that the combination of certain herbs could lead to a wrong treatment. Kana reflected that the knowledge from the manual was different, since it hadn't been written by people from the Eastern continent. The girl began to write down the recipe for the medicine from the book. Then she promised Kalen that she now had a precise plan to cure Lucy. The boy took the paper with a long list of herbs and plants. Kana explained that they were necessary ingredients to create a product that would cure Lucy. Kalen looked at the list again. He had never seen those plant names, so he felt a bit uneasy. The brother observed from the side Kana's work. He still didn't trust her, but the way she quickly identified Lucy's new symptoms softened his skepticism. The day turned out to be exhausting for Kana. While Kalen instructed the servants according to the list of medicines, she decided to go to her lab. Kalen informed her that his bedroom and lab remained the same. His words surprised the young woman since she didn't expect to find any memory of her in this house. The brother ended that conversation with the butler and confessed that the father had personally closed all the doors so that no one could enter. The butler handed Kana the key to her room. At the door of the bedroom, there was indeed a strong lock that protected the place from intrusions. In the room, there was silence. The furniture remained intact. Kana walked through the hall, surprised that everything was the same as 7 years ago when she arrived at the Valentino house. Inspecting the cabinets, the young woman wondered why Duke Addis hadn't changed anything. Kana opened the balcony door, convinced that the Duke would have definitely undone everything, but suddenly, she understood that the untouchable room meant a lot, as if Duke Addis had wanted to remember how the owner of that room lived. Everything indicated that Alexandro Addis had really awaited the return of his daughter. The young woman decided to forget those thoughts, since maybe she didn't understand them well and her father had no reason to keep her belongings. Kana concluded that it was enough with the feelings, so she returned from the balcony to the room, to head to the underground lab. She turned on the lamp and ventured into the dark corridors, toward the lab. Although much of the equipment was covered in dust, she noticed that the room, like the bedroom, remained unchanged. The drawings with descriptions of plants and their properties were still hanging on the board. The experimental preparations were in glass jars in a separate cabinet. Even her books remained intact. Now Kana could practice alchemy again. After examining the bookshelf with books, the girl stopped at a special manual. Since childhood, books had been her best friends, so in her absence she missed them a lot. After so long she wanted to dive into reading. Like in childhood, Kana inhaled the scent of the books. Even though they were in a closed room, they still held the aroma of ink and paper. But her moment of calm memories was interrupted by a loud noise from the adjacent room. The girl turned towards the door. Someone was trying to force the entrance insistently. With a horrible crash, the door flew open wide. After a strong masculine hand hit it, instantly in the doorway appeared the youngest brother of the Addis family. The boy was angry, and Kana clearly felt his negativity. The boy entered the lab furious. Kana's mere presence in the family house drove him insane, and now that he had her trapped, he decided to take personal revenge, Orsini was supposed to be at a banquet at the imperial house. Until nightfall. However, he got home a bit earlier. The boy entered his quarters. When a servant interrupted him, Orsini made a dismissive gesture because he frequently attended banquets, and they no longer brought him pleasure. But now he wanted to meet his brother. The servant became anxious during the absence of the family. The Duchess had appeared a guest whom Lord Orsini would not want to see under any circumstances. The assistant stammered a bit while informing that the Duchess of Valentino had arrived at the palace, and his words surprised Orsini. The boy didn't know how to react, so he just confirmed with the servants. If he was wrong in mentioning Kana. The administrator recounted all events, including the fact that now Kana was helping Kaylin develop a treatment for his younger sister. In the hall, a loud creaking of furniture was heard, so the assistant didn't finish telling. Recap Manhwa Orsini became furious to hear that his stepsister was in the palace, so he broke a decorative screen. He couldn't believe that his brother had directly brought a curse into his home, and that the treatment for Lucy was just a pretext to harm the family. Orsini found Kana in the underground lab. He had to force the door open, but the fear that the girl showed gave him unprecedented pleasure. Kana didn't move. Her brother was already starting to hurl insults at her, but she was still shocked to do anything. The young woman felt she was once again falling into the trap of fear that only Orsini could provoke, as his predatory gaze hadn't changed, only increased in danger. She knew she couldn't avoid the encounter, but hoped to delay their reunion at least a bit. Kana tried to resist the fear, but her fingers trembled and her legs wouldn't move. Suddenly a memory surged in her mind. When they were children, Orsini had advised her to do something useful and disappear from her family. Then the boy grabbed her by the collar of her dress and warned her that if she looked at him, he would personally kill her. Now, upon meeting him again, she instinctively wanted to lower her gaze, but this time she managed to hold it. Kana threw the book onto the table, turned toward her brother and greeted him. The man stood frozen in the doorway. Kana calmed her nerves and confessed that she was actually happy to see him today. While Orsini was bewildered, the girl lunged at him. She hugged him by the shoulders and surprised him by confessing that she had missed him a lot. The young woman reached out to him, but her intentions were not precisely noble. For years, she had planned how to take revenge for all the wounds that Orsini had caused her. The boy grabbed her hand and carelessly pushed it aside. Orsini began to mock with jokes, saying that after living with the Valentino family, she had lost her mind by approaching him like that. But he warned that she should be careful, as pretending to be the doctor wouldn't allow her to ignore her father's punishment. He flashed a cruel smile. He could already imagine how he would point out to Kana the place that belonged to her. The boy grabbed her hands to push her forcefully, but before doing so, he called her all his favorite insults. However, this time, Kana didn't look away from his face, but smiled sweetly, causing a memory to come to mind. One summer day when Orsini went for a walk in the woods, he found Kana in a meadow. The little girl didn't see him, so Orsini could observe her curiously. Back then, Kana was very interested in alchemy, so studying books in the woods was her favorite activity. It was one of the happiest moments of his past. For that reason, he didn't even notice how he got closer to Kana, almost brushing their foreheads. Although she asked him to keep his distance, the man didn't expect such a reaction from her, so he quickly pushed her toward a shelf of books, denying that he had wished to get close to Kana. But after his long absence, he almost lost control over himself. The girl approached the table, noticing her brother's confusion, and began to annoy him by saying that she had definitely missed Orsini. He didn't want to be caught in the truth, so he furiously denied everything and shouted insults, wishing that the girl would leave the estate again. Kana promised to stay at the estate until she helped Kaylin cure Lucy, after which she found on the table a special glass vial. The girl observed her brother, who was confused. He wanted her to leave the house, so that she would fear him again. But the calmness with which Kana looked at him troubled Orsini. When Kana turned around, Orsini became furious and almost raised his fist at her. Suddenly, the girl threw the contents of the vial at her brother. Orsini stopped. A stain appeared on his shirt, but he didn't know what Kana had done to him. The girl was calm. She had been planning the formula for this potion for a while, so now her brother would suffer a bit instead of her. The boy didn't understand her intention, but under his shirt a strange hissing sound was suddenly heard. Orsini grabbed his chest. His skin burned intensely. Under the fabric, the boy began to take off his clothes hurriedly to inspect his skin. But the potion continued to act and burn more intensely. The burning turned into sharp pain, when a large burn appeared on the boy's chest. Kana enjoyed seeing her brother so helpless. She could have used the potion that burned flesh since childhood, but she was scared. She promised him it would hurt more and leave terrible scars if Orsini didn't apply the antidote soon. Due to the intense pain, the boy collapsed to the ground, but Kana offered Orsini to apologize to her, and then she would give him the remedy. The boy was breathing heavily. He couldn't believe he had been tricked so easily, and now they even demanded an apology from him. The last curses came out of his mouth before he fainted. In the imperial palace, there was a festive atmosphere of banquets. Among the crowd of aristocrats, a messenger pushed through looking for the Duke. A special letter had been sent from the family estate. The Duke opened the envelope in surprise. It was easy to understand. The butler had informed him of Kana Addis's return to the family house, which made him smile. Orsini lay on the floor when Kaylin entered. The boy couldn't believe that Kana had defeated Orsini, with the potion something she had never done against her brother's attacks. The girl convinced her brother that the potion had an antidote that she devised at 14, but Orsini rejected the deal. That's why he lost consciousness. Kaylin was shocked. He couldn't get used to the fact that Kana had changed so much. The sister cared little about Orsini's state. Now the priority was that they would soon deliver the needles to treat Lucy. The girl asked her brother to let her know when everything was ready, to start the first treatment. Kaylin didn't stop his sister. With Orsini's body, he would handle it himself. Night was approaching. When Kaylin walked alone through the corridors of the mansion, many questions kept bothering him, especially the fact that even at 14, his sister was clever enough to prepare dangerous potions in the underground lab. Orsini, the best swordsman in the Empire, whose strength could break stones, but even he was not invincible against the potion. Kaylin couldn't understand how Kana could have such talents, but not use them, continuing to endure any humiliation from the past. After the events in the lab, the boy began to think that Kana's soul had changed, as she no longer feared launching a counterattack even against family members. At night, the magic master sent a box with medical needles. Kana carefully took the new tool to check its dimensions. After inspecting the needle from all sides, the girl confirmed that the quality of the instrument was excellent, and that it could be used to treat Lucy. The acupuncture technique aims to penetrate blocked channels and restore blood circulation throughout the body, and the needles made with high-quality magical stones would contribute to the treatment being performed quickly. In the package, there were also containers with medications that had been collected according to Kana's list. But before going to treat the girl, Kana handed a contract to her brother, which left him paralyzed. The boy felt hurt for not having been believed in his promise. But Kana needed guarantees that she could stay in the house, and the most effective way was to achieve it by signing a contract with conditions. Kaylin didn't feel like discussing for long, so he placed the seal on the document, just so Lucy could begin to recover her health soon. After checking the authenticity of the seal, the girl confirmed that the guarantees promised by Kaylin would now be fulfilled. Kana returned to Lucy's room with the medical equipment. The girl settled her in bed to start the procedure. Kana took the needle and was about to make the puncture when suddenly Kaylin yelled desperately for her not to do it. The brother demanded an explanation of why to insert the needle near the neck, and to emphasize it, he pulled Kana's hand away from Lucy. The girl observed the discussion, but upon hearing the mention of injections, she jumped out of bed. Kana demanded to be released so she could continue with the treatment, but Kaylin insisted on waiting for explanations. The brother tightened the girl's hand harder, but Kana was not willing to get emotional with her brother, so she advised him to decide whether he needed or not. The treatment. The girl understood that the longer they delayed, the more serious the consequences would be. Kaylin was confused. His fears clashed in his mind. He had never seen treatment methods like this, so he feared complications. Lucy didn't intervene in the conversation, but she heard that Kana had developed acupuncture, studying alchemy, so Kaylin had to trust her. The girl got closer to her brother. Her voice was calm, but the phrase that for Kaylin, her request to believe her was decisive. Kaylin didn't know what to do. He had never trusted Kana. Addis, as her reputation in the aristocratic society, was one of disdain. However, now before him stood a different Kana, confident in her work and willing to take on any consequences. The idea of Lucy having to have a needle stuck into her tormented him, but Kana's confidence gave him hope. The brother released the girl's hand and promised to trust her treatment methods. Kana refocused all her attention on Lucy, but demanded that Kaylin stay away from the bed. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to resist intervening. The girl needed a bit of time to calm down since Kaylin's behavior had angered her because of her brother. Lucy began to worry, so the stress could cause her muscle spasms and pain. Kana noticed that the girl was trembling and tried to distract her. The girl promised to carry out the treatment properly, but Lucy had to follow all her instructions. The little one was in a state of confusion. They didn't rush her to respond, but she knew she couldn't wait any longer. After thinking for a moment, the girl admitted that her sister was the only person who had promised to cure her, which is why Lucy trusted her. Although Kana had never met Lucy, she understood that she always faced any challenge with a serious approach. The girl laid Lucy back on the bed to adopt the proper position for the session, after which she performed the first injection. After finishing the session, Lucy finally managed to move a small part of her face. The girl moved her lips without any problem, and the rapid results of the treatment deeply impressed Kaylin. Kana hadn't expected results from the first session, but the high-quality needles achieved a successful treatment, so after such success, she hoped to gain Kaylin's trust. After finishing the examination, the girl understood that in a few treatments, she could cure Lucy as long as the proper treatment with infusions was followed. While heading toward the exit of the room, Kaylin suddenly called her sister. The boy blushed. He had previously not considered her a sister, so to disguise the awkwardness, he asked Kana to rest until the next session. The girl left the room in silence. She was already heading to her room when she reflected on how Kalen's patience would come to an end, and he would be willing to pry answers from her with determination regarding all his questions. But Kana was sure that during the 7 years, they hadn't seen each other. Kalen didn't awaken much interest in her, nor did the entire Addis family. What she had once longed to prove her best version was no longer relevant. Upon returning to her room, Kana noticed that someone had just cleaned it, and that the fire was burning in the fireplace. The events of the previous night had exhausted her, so she sank tiredly onto the bed. Although she had returned home, her hatred for the family hadn't disappeared, so she reminded herself that she was there for another purpose. She had seen many times how family relationships changed instantly, and saw no sense in correcting her behavior, so she simply decided to sleep. The next day, Kana's peaceful sleep was interrupted by the sudden appearance of her stepmother, who didn't hide her irritation toward her. Kana hadn't seen that woman in many years, but she remained a despicable person, willing to ruin any morning. The matriarch of the Addis family was clearly determined to argue, since in her absence Orsini had been injured because of Kana. Hola Addis raised her hand toward the young woman. She couldn't stand that someone ignored her. Hola's love for her son did not diminish. Kana was already used to that behavior, but upon touching the mark on her cheek, she asked her to use angry words in the future. The stepmother tried again to attack, but her action was interrupted by Kalen's voice. The boy burst into the room after his mother. He couldn't allow her to ruin the relationship with Kana while she was treating Lucy. The woman demanded to be told everything. She was not willing to tolerate an exile in her house, especially after she dared to hurt Orsini. Kana found it amusing to have a new status in the family, even though it was she who married and left the house. Hola moved toward the young woman. Her brave behavior annoyed her, but Kalen held his mother back and reminded her that Kana was his guest. Maintaining appearances, the woman harshly remarked that although Kana was her son's guest, that didn't mean she was happy to see her after the incident in the lab. Orsini was in intense suffering, which is why Hola turned to Kana demanding an antidote for her healing. Chloe didn't request the medication. She ordered the young woman to give it to her until she received a serious punishment. Kana felt that the stepmother was lying, so she calmly requested apologies in exchange for the remedy. The woman was surprised, but had no choice but to offer insincere apologies for not having controlled her emotions. However, Kana didn't accept them, so Chloe resigned, tightly gripped the hem of her dress, and murmured a promise that her attacks would not be repeated. Although Kana got what she wanted, she noticed that the woman quickly accepted her conditions, which meant she already understood the danger that she represented. She was not willing to tolerate an exile in her home, especially after she dared to hurt Orsini. Kana found it fun to have a new status in the family, even though she was the one who got married and left the house. Hello moved towards the young woman. Her brave behavior annoyed her, but Kalen held back her mother. She reminded her that Kana was her guest keeping up appearances. The woman commented harshly. Even though Kana was her son's guest, it didn't mean she was happy to see her after the incident in the lab. Orsini was in intense pain, which is why Hello went to Kana demanding an antidote for his healing. Chloe didn't ask for the medication. She ordered the young woman to give it to her until she received serious punishment. Kana felt that the stepmother was lying, so she calmly asked for an apology in exchange for the remedy. The woman was surprised, but had no choice but to offer insincere apologies for not controlling her emotions. However, Kana did not accept them, so Chloe resignedly gripped the hem of her dress tightly. She murmured a promise that her attacks would not happen again, even though Kana got what she wanted. She noticed that the woman quickly accepted her conditions, which meant she already understood the danger she posed. To make the guests leave as soon as possible, the young woman took a vial from the nightstand. She handed the antidote to the stepmother and indicated that she should apply a drop initially. Kana wanted Orsini to apologize, but the presence of the stepmother was enough, since she didn't care about Orsini in the lab. She couldn't hold back. She just wanted to release some of her anger. Chloe relaxed upon receiving the antidote, so she had no reason to stay in the young woman's room, but she didn't try to leave. Instead, she started convincing the girl to go to her son and administer the treatment herself. Kana understood the stepmother's game. She didn't believe in the power of the remedy and was looking for an excuse to accuse her of deception, so she decided to play along. She headed with her toward Orsini. Although Orsini was suffering from a burning pain in his chest, he still found the strength to insult Kana. The recap manhwa situation didn't hurt her, but she decided to threaten him and promised that she could accidentally break the bottle with the medicine. If Orsini continued, the young man collapsed. His strength was already exhausted when Kana leaned over him to apply the ointment. The sister was a bit worried about her brother, especially when he tried to confirm if the antidote would really work. His behavior surprised the girl. She wondered why Orsini trusted her. When she touched the boy on the chest near the burn, she warned him not to trust her, since the remedy could be another deadly concoction. The terrified stepmother began to yell at Kana, but the young woman had achieved her goal. Now Orsini would fear causing her harm. The situation turned comical. Kana praised her brother for being the best swordsman and not being afraid to take the remedy. Chloe urged the young woman and Kana, eager to leave the room, of her brother opened the jar. Orsini didn't move until the young woman poured all the balm over his wound. A slight chill ran through the boy's skin, followed by the gradual onset of healing for the inflamed burn. Callan and Chloe watched in astonishment as the antidote quickly resolved the injury. Chloe, of course, was glad that the antidote was real. Although the entire healing process seemed doubtful, Chloe had watched Kana when she was a child. Alchemy was a hobby then. But now seeing her power, she wondered how far Kana would be willing to go for her own benefit. No longer waiting, Kana abruptly got up from Orsini's bed and passed by her family toward the door, wanting to go to sleep and avoid the other family members as much as she could. The young woman reached the door, still angry about Chloe's interruption in her room, and waking her up for such an insignificant matter. Kana approached to open the door when she suddenly stopped in the threshold. Her breath quickened. The person she saw in front of her definitely shouldn't have found her today. In the hallway stood Alexander Addis, who had come from the Imperial Ball and hadn't even changed out of his formal suit. Going directly to Orsini, Kana stood frozen when her father reached out his hand toward her. Instantly, the man's fingers rested on her cheek, and he affectionately caressed her head. This left her confused. Then, loosening his grip, the man gently stroked, her face behaving as if he were truly happy that Kana had returned. Finally, the young woman regained her composure. The stress dissipated, even though she didn't understand why her father was acting this way. In all her life in the palace, he had never treated her this way. Alexander Addis seemed pleased. He was glad that Kana Addis had returned to the family home. But the young woman was surprised that he'd still considered her Addis and not Valentina. Kana felt strange. She had spent so much time with Li Juhua that it was hard for her to call Alexander Addis dad. But she managed to gather the strength to show courtesy and politeness. She knew she had to quickly explain why she had come to the palace, since her father's kindness could disappear at any moment. For Callan and his mother, the day had been too intense. Even now, with the Duke's different behavior, they didn't know how to act, so they watched silently from the side. Chloe was annoyed that her husband had forgotten the order, and that instead of kicking the young woman out, he stayed with her and tried to listen to Kana. The Duke observed his daughter's movements closely, and that concentration disturbed the woman as her husband seemed to genuinely try to listen to his daughter, albeit a bit awkwardly and stammering. But Kana recounted the entire story of how she had come to the house and asked her father not to punish Kaylin for staying a while in the palace to finish Lucy's treatment. A silence settled in the room. The father did not interrupt the young woman's monologue, but he also did not dare to say anything in response. Due to the attention, Kana felt like a child under the weight of her father's judgment. But the man did not reprimand her. He simply understood her story, which troubled his daughter. Alexander advised her to act as she wished, and it was the first time he showed understanding towards her. While the surprised girl remained in the center of the room, the man turned around and headed toward the exit. Kana had not anticipated such a turn of events. Her father had never before allowed her to act according to her desire, although perhaps his intention was that if she wanted to die, he would not stop her. The night ended calmly, and a new day arrived in the old Addis, which promised to calm the recent shocks. However, all tranquility vanished when Isabella, one of Alexander Addis's daughters, learned of the events from the previous day. Isabella hated Kana's return now that she was back in the mansion. The Addis family was once again reunited under one roof, which foretold difficulties. Years ago, when Kana got married, Isabella was excited about the possibility of never seeing her stepsister again. After her departure, Alexander Addis forbade the girl from attending social events, forcing Kana to remain in the background at the Valentin estate. Isabella delighted in the rumors about the casts, enforced by Countess Elster, so her stepsister's life did not bother her now that Kana had returned and consolidated her presence through a contract with Kaylin. Isabella had few options to expel her sister. The news from her mother left her perplexed. She had been out for several hours, but now everything was different. Isabella was furious with her brother. What she heard from her mother seemed false, although deep down, uncontrollable anger was forming. Kaylin was working in his office when loud knocks with a fist interrupted the tranquility. Without waiting for an invitation, Isabella violently opened the door. Intending to convince Kaylin, the girl walked aggressively toward her brother's desk. She was annoyed that Kana was taking advantage of Kaylin's soft heart and lying to him, claiming that during her absence, she had managed to become a doctor. The boy kept examining the reports, but assured the girl that even after just one treatment, Lucy's condition had improved. Isabella couldn't contain her irritation. Her brother was too naive and didn't understand that Lucy no longer required treatment. Suddenly, Isabella couldn't control her thoughts and confessed that even if the treatment were possible, it was no reason to allow Kana to enter the house. Upon hearing that, Callan interrupted his reading of the documents. The atmosphere in the room changed drastically. Colin's mind began to cloud with darkness. He couldn't believe that for his sister Lucy's well-being was trivial. Lucy was just the daughter of a lowly servant, so it didn't matter to her how the girl lived. With a paralyzed face, Kalen's expression twisted with anger. Now that Kana had revealed the truth about her family, he saw his relatives' mockery towards his half-sisters with different eyes. Isabella slammed her palms on the desk, demanding to know why Kalen cared more about Lucy than his own sister. This conversation drained Kalen. He tiredly closed his eyes, and without arguing, asked Isabella to leave his office. The next moment, the office door slammed shut, signaling that the conversation was over, and Isabella remained in the hallway shocked, as it was the first time in her life that her brother had kicked her out of his room. Isabella decided not to ignore such an attitude, so she went to find Orsini to form an alliance against Cana. Isabella found her brother in the training field. He looked exhausted after practicing with the sword, but the girl was annoyed that Orsini was doing nothing to expel Cana from the castle. Orsini was lost in his thoughts. Even the arrival of his sister didn't pull him out of them. The girl patted him on the shoulder, trying to get his attention, but he simply stared at the ground. Isabella dramatically shouted that nobody understood her intentions, but her act didn't work. Orsini remained seated in the same spot. The girl returned to the village. As she passed by her father's office door, she hesitated for a moment to ask for help, but understanding his character, the young woman silently passed through the room so as not to disturb him while he worked. The village was empty. Although Isabella found no allies, the idea of asking her father for help frightened her since childhood. Isabella considered her father a terrifying man, even though he never punished or reprimanded her. His aura scared her. For years, the man maintained his status as a handsome and very dominant young man. Isabella always envied her father for his abilities and talents. However, upon observing him, she understood many things. In reality, Alexander Addis looked at all the members of the Addis family equally. His gaze overflowed with evident indifference. Looking out the window, Isabella saw Cana walking down to the garden. Without waiting, the young woman ran toward the village exit and managed to catch up with Cana at the bottom of the stairs. Isabella grabbed the girl by the arm, trying to be nice, asking her about her mood after returning home. Although all her thoughts were about how uncomfortable she felt being close to Cana's black hair. Cana held the conversation with her sister, which surprised Isabella, since she never used to look at anyone from the Addis family. The girls walked along the garden path toward the pavilion. Isabella decided to take the opportunity to discover all the details about Kaylin's deal with Cana. With a forced smile, Isabella asked to be taught how to work with Lucy, since many doctors couldn't overcome their disgust at seeing her. Cana responded with a denial. Her voice was firm. She didn't want to give her sister knowledge that could hurt Lucy. The girl pulled her hand from Isabella's grip and pushed her aside. Cana made it clear that she had no intention of playing along with Isabella or trying to get close to her. Isabella froze in the middle of the hallway, while Cana continued her walk, not realizing. Isabella ended up in her room, where the servants served her a calming tea to regain her composure. Coming out of her trance, the young woman couldn't hold back her curses toward Cana. Isabella was uneasy for not understanding Cana's attitude since she had initially been kind to her in the garden. But then she brusquely demanded that they not pretend to be close. She still had no plan to get rid of Cana. With this new behavior, using the old methods would be complicated. Over the 7 years that had passed, Isabella had never stopped considering Cana a disruptive presence that caused conflict in the family. The girl tried to find arguments to stop hating her stepsister, but the habit of blaming Cana for all the family's ills never left her. When Cana Addis was born, many scandalous rumors emerged about the Duke's family. With her black hair and eyes, she was not only considered a creature of the black smoke monsters, but it was also speculated that the Addis family could be involved with a cult that worshipped them. The rumors spread so much that at one point they took on a new form, to the point that it was believed that the Duke Addis had made a pact with the black smoke worshippers, resulting in Cana's birth. At one point, discussions got out of control and Alexander Addis almost lost his title as Duke. However, during that period, a monster attack occurred in the capital, which the Duke had to fight. After the victory, many rumors simply disappeared. Isabella knew the history of the continent and understood that the Addis and Valentine families were the only ones capable of facing the black smoke, so she took for granted that the rumors were false. Years passed since the attack. Stories about an alliance with their admirers were no longer spread. However, Cana continued to grow and her hair and eyes did not change. The Duke's illegitimate daughter was the symbol of failure, disgust, and filth, so it was no surprise that even strangers treated her as if she were family. Isabella liked the idea that there were still people who, like her, saw Cana only as a disgusting insect that annoyed everyone. The more she thought about Cana, the stronger her desire to approach her sister became, something Isabella tried to avoid at all costs. The only solution was to expel her sister from the house. The contract between Kalin and Cana complicated everything. Suddenly, the young woman came up with the idea of using the conditions of the contract against her sister. The servants brought lunch for the lady while she devised a plan to intervene in Lucy's recovery. Isabella accepted her plan without hesitation. She didn't care about others' feelings. Her main goal was to get rid of Cana. At the Addis estate, a few more unusually quiet days passed. Cana readjusted to her old room. Apart from Lucy's treatment, she spent a lot of time studying the diary Li Juhua kept. All the pages were stained with resentment. Li Juhua's life was one of exile, so she had to forget her bright past with her family. Now she was Cana Addis, a 17-year-old girl living surrounded by hostility and loneliness. After reading, the young woman slammed the diary shut. Li Juhua made many mistakes, but Kana couldn't blame her. The young woman understood that all the consequences Li Juhua faced were just the result of her own weakness and fear of changing her life for the better. Life transformed Kana. Now she clearly saw the repulsive qualities of her relatives who not only destroyed her life, but also Li Juhua's. That's why Kana longed to leave home soon as Lucy's treatment was going well. A maid accompanied by several guards entered the room. She informed them that she had an order from the owner of the property. Kana jumped off the sofa when the guards approached her. The men grabbed her. She tried to resist, but her hands were held tightly. Finally, the young woman ordered brusquely that they let her go so she could meet Chloe. Suddenly, Kana felt panic. The maid announced that Lady Lucy was in critical condition and urgently needed doctors. In silence, the young woman was taken to Lucy's room where some family members were already present. Kalen was sitting beside Lucy's bed. He hadn't expected to see Kana, although Chloe and Isabella watched the situation from the side without intervening in the conversation. Kana noticed that her stepmother and sister were acting too dramatically. Their faces showed no sadness over Lucy's condition, but tears streamed down their cheeks. On the other side of the bed was Lucy's personal maid, whose face revealed how terrified she was by what had happened. When Kana looked at the bed, where the pale body of the girl lay, she felt a weight in her chest. Kalen didn't turn to his sister. All his focus was on Lucy. Kana hadn't expected to see him in such a state. At that moment, Kalen was like an open book and his emotions were easily perceptible. Isabella silently observed Kana's confusion, although she understood it wasn't the right time to discuss. Kana moved closer to the bed. She had to ask Callan to step aside to examine the girl. Her sister's voice changed from concern to anger. The boy gritted his teeth to contain himself when Kana tried to check on Lucy. Suddenly, Kalen slapped his sister, pushing her hand away. He could no longer allow Kana to do anything for Lucy since he blamed her for what happened. In the palm of Kana, a large red bruise appeared. Now Callan considered it a mistake to have trusted the promise of recovery. The boy turned around, but it wasn't the first time he faced his impulsivity. So he tried to examine the girl again. Callan breathed heavily when Kana got a little closer to the bed. That reaction made her stop. Jumping from her seat, the boy muttered under his breath that it was all Kana's fault, because Lucy had never been so sick before the treatment with needles. Kana was not surprised anymore. At the hospital, she had seen many reactions from family members, so Kalen's unconscious whims didn't bother her. The brother was surprised by his sister's calm tone. He didn't want to lose his temper, even though she had invited him to do so to bring the boy back to sanity. Kana scolded him and promised that he could hate her for the rest of his life, but only after she did her job and restored Lucy's health. Approaching her brother, she informed him directly that they had little time to understand the cause of the illness, and that Callan's actions were only hindering more than helping. The young woman pointed at Lucy, whose breathing had become too heavy. She had no time to be kind. She warned Callan that if he didn't get out of her way, little Lucy would die in a few hours. Isabella, who was silently observing from the corner, was surprised by her stepsister's boldness toward Callan. The boy found no reply, but he didn't dare to interfere, clenching his fists when she passed by him, and reminded him to stay away from Lucy while she worked with her. The confrontation concluded. Now, all attention was on Kana, so she had to demonstrate the utmost professionalism to establish the diagnosis. Lucy's examinations were hoarse. Throughout the treatment, Kana had not noticed any symptoms. Thus, Lucy's face turned red. The fever was beginning to invade her. However, in the morning, after the procedure, there were no signs of illness aside from the initial symptoms. With her breath labored and the fever rising, Kana noticed that the girl's body sometimes trembled in convulsions, which meant that it was no longer a consequence of facial paralysis. Lucy was not sick with something new. Although her clothes were wet, as if she had been caught in the rain recently a few days ago, Lucy had seemed cheerful and healthy, so the illness could not have arisen on its own. Kana shot a glance at the girl's personal maid, who was crying nonstop next to the head of the bed, pounding on it. Recap Manhwa ordered the maid to report everything Lucy had eaten that day. Isabella was alarmed when Kana began to interrogate the servants. The young woman understood that her sister was starting to grasp something. To calm the situation, Isabella defended the servants. In her opinion, Kana had begun to cross the permitted limits. Even being next to the sick girl, Callan didn't understand why suddenly his sister began to defend Lucy, who had never shown interest in the well-being of the girl. Isabella began to set her plan in motion. Now that Lucy was sick, she could convince Callan that Kana had never studied medicine, and that all her promises were just an excuse to stay in the family home. Kana ignored Isabella. She ordered the servants again to report all the food that had been served to Lucy. The maid looked at Isabella with fear. Then she stammered, trying not to say anything further. Kana was getting closer to the truth. She herself had prepared the menu for Lucy. After the girl started to recover, which meant that the maid was hiding something and the girl could have eaten something dangerous, Kana grew tired of waiting. She firmly demanded that they reveal everything that could have been modified in their dietary recommendations. The maid was trapped. She didn't know what consequences she would face, so she looked silently at Kana. Before the servant was ready to say anything, a scream from Isabella filled the room, demanding that she stop interrogating. Kaylin and Kana looked at the young woman as she got up from the sofa. Isabella was irritated that everything had gone too far. Kana had probably discovered the deception, so it was time to end those endless questions. The girl decided to attack Kana again, manipulating the apparent concern for Lucy. Isabella looked at her brother and accused Kana of lying, claiming that under the pretext of helping with the medicine, she had committed a despicable act that worsened Lucy's health, to stay in the family home for much longer. But Isabella's next words claiming that Lucy should not be treated, as Kana did definitively revealed that it was a planned poisoning. Kana exposed the fraud. Lucy would not die. Her symptoms and fever would last a few days. Then she would recover completely. Isabella clung to the doorframe as her sister remained frozen. Suddenly, Isabella ordered the guards to arrest Kana and lock her in her room. The guards exchanged glances. No one expected that order, and one tried to protest. Isabella grew even angrier. She was a pure member of the Addis family, so anyone on the property had to obey her. Chloe observed her daughter's crisis and already understood her intentions. She decided to support Isabella and also ordered the guards to remove Kana, since now as a doctor, she could not help Lucy while emotionally disturbed. A smile appeared on Isabella's face, with the support of their mother. The plan was almost complete. The guards in the hallway reacted with doubts to the lady of the house's order, but they had no option to resist. The men began to slowly approach Kana. They didn't want her to act impulsively, so they politely asked her to accompany them. The young woman decided to stop holding back. She shouted that if the sick girl didn't receive quick treatment, she could get worse. Isabella waited from the corner, while the guards did their job, but it irritated her how slowly they acted with the girl as if they feared harming the exiled aristocrat. Kana resisted the guards, but Isabella was already openly demanding that they forcibly remove her. Kana was exhausted from resisting. She no longer knew how to convince everyone that it hadn't been her mistake. Treating her suddenly, one of the guards grabbed her and threw her over his shoulder to take her out of Lucy's room. Kana hung upside down. Her position was unfavorable, and now resistance was useless. Kaylin had had enough of it all. The circus's sister was causing approach the guard, ordering him to stop immediately. Isabella had not counted on her brother's intervention, so she couldn't react in time. The brother demanded that this disaster stop immediately, while it was not too late. Kana did not appreciate her brother's action. He had never intervened in her problems before. The guards tried to say something, but Kaylin already took her and pulled her off the guard's shoulder. A look of determination passed over the boy's face, as if he had made the most important decision of his life. In the past, he had always occupied the position of an observer, keeping away from events. Even if he noticed her presence, the boy made no attempts to approach his sister. At that moment, Kana felt very uncomfortable, that her brother was holding her, so she asked him to let her go. Kaylin carefully set her on the ground and apologized for what had happened. Then turning to the guards, he ordered them to leave the room. Isabella watched as the guards hurriedly left through the door. Now her plan was definitely lost. The girl had lost the trust in her brother's eyes, but to try to save her dignity, she continued shouting words about taking care of Lucy. The brother approached Isabella furious because she had dared to get close to little Lucy. The girl fell silent. Now that the boy was angry, she couldn't face him. So she decided to pretend to be the victim, as Callum was channeling his anger toward her, not toward Kana, who had made a mistake in the treatment. In the girl's eyes, her brother had become a traitor, who had put a despicable failure above his own sister's judgment. Isabella needed support, so she decided to involve her mother in the discussion. The girl with tears in her eyes began to complain that her care for Lucy was not important to Kaylin. Chloe had accumulated more wisdom in her life than Isabella, and understood perfectly that while Kana was under Kaylin's protection, nothing would help them get rid of her. The woman got up from the sofa and decided to leave the room, justifying that she was too tired of the disturbances and screams. Isabella tried to stop the woman, but she was already heading to the door, claiming it was too late, and she needed to rest firmly, taking Isabella's hand. The woman dragged her with her so she wouldn't make any more foolishness. The daughter resisted uncomfortably, promising to stay in Lucy's room to monitor her health, although now she feared that Kana would say something inappropriate. If by chance Isabella left the room, the door closed behind the mother, but Kaylin asked his sister to follow the woman. Isabella tried to appeal to compassion, but Kaylin threatened that he would not ask again. That tone made Kana smile with satisfaction. Kana noticed that her sister had been behaving suspiciously lately. Now she was interested in what she was hiding. Approaching her brother, Kana asked him not to expel Isabella. Now she wanted to reveal a great deception that Isabella was hiding. Without waiting for Isabella's reaction, Kana again turned to the maid to find out what harmful food Lucy might have eaten. Isabella was still not calmed down. Now that Kana continued with the interrogation, she hoped the maid had enough common sense to stay quiet. Suddenly, Kaylin also approached the maid and asked her to help Kana discover the truth, which left Isabella in shock. After calming down, the maid reported that all the food had been prepared according to the menu, and that Lucy hadn't eaten any other dishes. However, a day after eating, Lucy drank tea that according to her tasted different from the previous one. Kana asked the maid to bring the tea Lucy had taken, but now Isabella was terrified that Kana would guess something bad about the herbs. Although Isabella assured that only an expert could verify the authenticity of the tea, the maid brought the tray with the utensil in the tea box, and they all sat around the small table, where the maid placed the tray. Kana then began to examine it. The girl took the jar where the leaves were kept for the tea and spilled the leaves on the table. Kaylin noticed that the tea smelled strong and had many lavender leaves. Upon examining the little petals of the flower, Kana understood that this herb had not been prepared according to the recipe she had made. While holding the leaves up to the light, she noticed among the petals unfamiliar flowers. Isabella laughed ironically, saying that not everyone dies after drinking tea with lavender leaves. Isabella began to praise the flavor of the tea, so Lucy must have just made a mistake. When trying it, Isabella adopted a new plan. Now she had to pretend convincingly that she understood tea while separating the leaves in the cup. Kana tried to identify what kind of herbs the strange ones were. She placed the can on the table and announced that she doubted the authenticity of the tea. Isabella suddenly forgot all her arguments. Now she was closer to failure than ever. Jumping from her chair, she slammed her hands on the table and accused Kana of making up nonsense by taking a spoonful of the tea. She decided to shift the suspicions elsewhere and offered it to her brother, asking him to smell it and tell her if it differed from the tea they always drank. Before Kaylin could respond, she shoved the leaves into his hand, suggesting he checks for himself. While Callan examined the tea, Isabella turned her attention to the maid and demanded she smell the remedy. Kaylin observed the lavender flowers, and after inspecting them, he had no doubt in confirming that the tea was ordinary. The maid stammered, assuring that she could only smell the aroma of lavender and nothing else. These arguments convinced Isabella to resume the fight against Kana and begin to celebrate her victory. The young woman managed to convince the others that the tea from the band was now not even Kana, had to reply before the growing confidence in general. Isabella interpreted the silence as a victory and arrogantly announced that she would personally go to their father to ask him to expel Kana from the castle since she had come in deceiving. Kana hoped Isabella would admit her mistake, but now that she had gotten entangled in lies, she had no intention of forgiving her. Isabella pretended to be kind, perfectly playing the role of someone who would never hurt her little sister. The young woman immersed herself in her triumph, not realizing how calm Kana was, who now anticipated that she would never allow her to return to the castle. Suddenly, Kana asked Isabella to stop being so excited. The young woman immersed herself in her triumph, unaware of how calm Kana was, who now anticipated that she would never allow her to return to the castle. Suddenly, Kana asked Isabel to stop being so excited. This left her stunned. Isabel's absurd attempts to justify herself made Kana lose her patience, who now decided to reveal the whole truth. Picking up the can of tea leaves, the young woman hinted that there was enough to conduct an experiment. Kana scoffed and suggested making tea for Isabel since she had insisted so much that she loved lavender-infused tea that it shouldn't be hard for her to drink it. All her thoughts vanished from her mind. Her heart raced in her chest, but she didn't know how to turn the situation in her favor. The maid prepared the drink and placed the cup of tea next to Isabel. However, the next moment a loud noise was heard. Suddenly, Isabel disappeared from her spot on the sofa. Kana wasn't surprised. She had thought from the beginning that solving it would be easy. That trick worked well. The young woman who had desperately defended the benefits of the tea suddenly didn't have the courage to try it. Callan and Kana watched as Isabel ran stumbling toward the door, lamenting along the way that she still had urgent matters to resolve. The girl ran so fast that her shoes got caught on the floorboards. Even while managing to shout that those inspections were a pure scam, Isabel ran through the halls nonstop. Her life would now be harder. Tears rolled down her face, but she didn't want to accept her guilt. However, she would forever remember the look on her brother's face, his eyes filled with disgust and disdain, which resembled those of their father. Callan hurried out of Lucy's room. He found it hard to believe his sister's betrayal. Overwhelmed with emotions, he began to get a headache, so he wanted to resolve quickly. What had poisoned the tea? Kana rearranged the tea leaves and pointed to his brother, the red bean flower, which was also purple Callan, and the maid examined the evidence, although they couldn't distinguish it from the tea leaves. Kana explained that the dried bean flowers have no smell and visually resemble lavender, pulling out two distinct flowers from the pile. She showed the differences. The bean flowers had a darker color and the buds were denser. Taking one last look at the flowers, Callan noticed that Kana knew a lot about botany. However, that didn't calm him. In the room, silence fell before he started to worry about how toxic the red bean flowers could be. Kana dismissed it, saying those buds were just herbs, leaving her brother perplexed. The recap manhwa girl explained that the danger of those flowers only manifests when consuming many, and the symptoms start with a stomachache. Callan was saddened. Lucy's symptoms were much worse than just a simple stomachache. The girl patted her brother's shoulder, asking him not to worry and assuring him she knew what to do. That's why. There was definitely no dangerous poison in the tea. The red bean flowers shouldn't be taken with the medication she prepared for Lucy since it contains licorice. Kana explained with a simple example that mixing the extracts of red bean and licorice increases the toxic properties of the bean flowers. Kana decided that the purpose of this tea was to make Lucy slightly sick since only the doctors know how to interact correctly with licorice. The girl asked the maid for a sheet of paper and began to take notes. The deception was for Kaylin to break the contract with Kana if Lucy remained sick. However, when the situation got out of control, the person who made the substitution should already be terrified. But Kana knew that Isabel would avoid any punishment. Kaylin didn't know what he would do with his sister, but now, Lucy's condition was the most important thing to him. The girl finished writing on the sheet the recipe for the decoction that needed to be prepared and given to Lucy to drink, after which the girl would feel better. Kana handed the recipe to the maid, ordering her to go immediately to the pharmacist and buy everything necessary. When the maid left the room, Kaylin apologized for the first time to his sister for what had happened. The boy sat on the couch without moving after those words escaped his mouth. Kana stood still at the door. She couldn't see her brother's face, so she couldn't be sure of the sincerity of his words, although Kaylin's face clearly showed desperation. She didn't continue the conversation. The room was engulfed in silence. Kana didn't move from her spot standing behind her brother. Suddenly, she asked him something that had been bothering her for a long time, how Kaylin had become the way he was. The girl thought it was all the contract's fault, so she assured the boy that their agreement was still in effect and that he didn't need to pay her any extra attention. Kaylin tried to justify his actions, but his confessions had already left a strong impact on the girl, so she asked him to stop calling her sister and to go back to using their normal names. Kana turned around and headed for the exit, asking her brother to act like always, since when she hated living. It was easier in the residence. It had been a month since the incident in Lucy's room. Now the girl was almost completely recovered and could enjoy the garden with Kana. The girl ran to the garden, where her sister was already waiting for her. Lucy's health was good, so she could live fully. But now a new chapter had arrived. The maid arrived with the food to the terrace. During the past month, Kana hadn't tried to get close to the family except for Lucy, as she clearly understood what her purpose was in coming to the residence. Addis. Lucy began excitedly recounting her dream, in which they both visited a flower meadow and had a picnic. The joy in Lucy's eyes brightened Kana's mood, and the fact that her recovery had been quick and positive gave her more confidence. Although she wanted to stay longer in the house, Lucy had few friends in the house, so she took every opportunity to spend time with those who were kind to her. Lucy invited her sister for a walk around the city. They could even take Kaylin with them. The girl started to doubt when Kaylin appeared on the terrace. The boy promised not to interfere with the outing or accompany them if Kana didn't want to spend time with him. Lucy felt sad while Kana hid her irritation and tried not to reject her brother's proposal since her assumptions were empty, and she didn't care whether he was with them or not since returning to the mansion. The young woman had two goals: first, to get permission for the divorce from the Duke, Valentino, and before leaving to recover her alchemy tools from her lab. She had no other pending matters there and didn't plan to stay longer than necessary. Grabbing a cup of tea from the table, Kana decided it was time to meet her father, even though she felt embarrassed that in her society, there still existed the crude tradition that many things require a man's permission. Rising from the table, the young woman informed that she had to resolve a matter and would return to Lucy to discuss the trip to the city. Lucy was glad that she would soon be back in a month. In the mansion, Kana grew tired of everyone insisting on calling her sister. Petting the girl's hair, she thought it was good that Lucy had the chance to enjoy a normal life. Kaylin remembered his last conversation with Kana. Her words that he should hate her had etched in his mind. That conversation was more like a fight. Kaylin didn't understand why she wanted to leave the mansion if she had come there herself after leaving the Valentino family. Even behind closed doors, loud voices could be heard when Kana tried to convince Kaylin that her wish was for a free life in solitude. The young woman asked him to hold on a little longer, after which he would never see her again. After that conversation, Kaylin began to doubt whether he felt negative feelings toward his sister, for it seemed to him that she was the one who hated him. That realization hurt his feelings deeply. Kaylin reached out to take Kana's hand, but the young woman had already turned toward the door. He watched her walk away. The boy couldn't understand why she held so much contempt for him, but to that question another one was added. Kaylin had always been ready to attack, yet now he couldn't understand why she deserved his contempt at that moment for being a loner. Kana's presence had always been a signal to pay attention to since childhood. The strong influence she had on Kaylin was that his environment considered Kana's existence a mortal sin. She was a flower tangled in the darkness of dirty rumors and offenses. But there was also her kindness that always manifested in her desire to help Kaylin with her pleas. That slight naivete allowed the girl to endure the attacks directed at her. That was the justification for which Kaylin had consented to treat her that way since her birth. The reasons were simple. With each new offense received, he wanted to throw another one. But now, as Kana changed, Kaylin's habits faltered. Yes, Kana Addis was born with dark hair, but that didn't give him the right to look at her with disdain, while preparing a new blow since her birth was not her choice. Kaylin himself was trapped in his prejudices, but now that Kana was no longer that scared girl, he should reconsider his attitude toward her. The boy understood that he could never pretend to erase the past he had with his sister just because he realized it now. He finds the answer too late. But now he has Lucy, so he still has a chance to fix someone's life. Kana's voice pulled Kaylin out of his thoughts. The girl was saying goodbye to Lucy at that moment. The girl left the booth, but the boy didn't dare to say anything while saying goodbye. Throughout this time, a rare feeling had been appearing, constantly in his chest. Kaylin wavered between fixing everything or leaving it as it is, since his sister already had enough worries. Kana headed to the garden exit, guessing that the Duke would already be home. Seeing the manor among the trees, the girl began to feel anxious. But she quickly calmed down. Kana reached the main entrance of the palace without encountering anyone on the way. The hallway to her father's office was also empty, so no one bothered her. It had been a long time since she had been in that part of the house, which made her nervous. But gathering her courage, the girl knocked on the door. She hoped the man wouldn't let her out, but suddenly an invitation to enter was heard from the room. Kana sighed, remembering her plan to do everything possible to get her father's authorization for the divorce and leave the Hades duchy. Grabbing the door, the girl hesitated a bit, needing to be brave. She couldn't demand permission and escape. Shoving the door open, it swung wide, but Kana stood still in the threshold. At the other end of the office behind the desk was the Duke. He didn't look up from the papers, even when the girl approached him. For Kana, time seemed to stop. She barely took a few steps and all her father's habits remained the same. He was still wearing glasses while working, and the sound of the mechanical pen broke the silence in the room. Even the habit of sitting in immaculate clothes was still there. Silently approaching the table, the young woman asked her father to dedicate a moment for a serious conversation. The man didn't stop working on the reports, but he reminded his daughter that she could start the conversation herself, since if he didn't have time, he wouldn't have let her enter the office. He still kept his habit of working without rest, so Kana had no choice but to present her proposal. Her father's dry phrases took away some of her confidence, but she remembered that it was her only opportunity to obtain his consent. So gathering her courage, she announced that she had come to ask him to authorize her divorce from Duke Valentin. The man's hand stopped over the letter when he heard his daughter's request. Alejandro Adis turned his gaze from the papers, looked at her and asked again what divorce she was talking about, not hiding his emotions. Kana shouted that the main cause of the divorce was in the Valentino family itself. The father removed his glasses, but listened attentively to the young woman's story. Kana began to recount in detail how Countess Elster, in her role as mother-in-law, had acted toward her and the control she exerted over her life. The young woman confessed all the abuses of the past, 7 years, and the fact that even the servants no longer treated her as an aristocrat of the Adis family. That was the last blow to her patience. Trembling under her father's piercing gaze, Kana decided that no matter how badly they had treated her, she had to expose all the offenses, as if the Valentino family were mocking the entire Adis family, not just her. The father remained silent, so Kana clarified directly that she could not stand the Adis family's status, being despised by other aristocrats, which is why she needed to annul the marriage. The oppressive silence flooded everything. The young woman wished that Alexander Addis valued the status of the family as much as she did, which is why she insisted with more strength in her request. Suddenly, the father announced that he accepted the divorce and stopped asking questions. Kana's heart skipped a beat. Not even in her wildest dreams had she imagined such a quick response. The father turned his attention back to the document and assured his daughter that he would personally instruct the butler to prepare the divorce papers. But the young woman remained stunned in front of her father's desk. She expected to hear wishes for her to die in the Valentino family, not an agreement to the divorce. So she insisted to confirm if his decision was final. Alexander thought Kana had changed her mind for insisting, but she swore that her decision to divorce was irrevocable. The young woman smiled, pleased. Of course, she knew that family status was crucial for the Duke, so she would not allow anyone to ruin it, not even an illegitimate daughter. Now that she had obtained consent, Kana began to worry that her father might believe she intended to stay forever in the Addis estate. Kana began to fabricate a lie claiming that she had always dreamed of leaving the empire and living in a coastal city. She hoped that this promise would satisfy the Duke. The young woman promised to leave the house as soon as the divorce papers were signed and never come back, but those words deeply surprised the Duke. Kana leaned to leave the office and wait for the documents, but suddenly the father announced that he had changed his mind. At first, the young woman thought she hadn't heard correctly, but when the father said he would not allow the divorce, she understood that her life would now be chained forever. The shock almost made her lose consciousness. In her mind, a single phrase resonated. Her father would not allow the divorce. The man returned to his work. For him, the conversation was over. Kana couldn't believe that his decision had changed so quickly and tried to figure out the reason for the rejection. Not distracted by the documents, the man used a cold tone to indicate that he was not obliged to explain his decisions. The young woman shouted that he could not just change, his mind in an instant clenching her fists, when her father pointed out that he was old enough to modify his decisions. Alexander Addis was a powerful figure. He didn't ask permission from anyone nor needed justifications. But unlike her father, it was important for Kana to understand what she had done wrong, as she felt like a creature, begging for permission from the master. Her voice trembled as she clarified whether her father's rejection meant she had to return to the Valentino mansion and endure the Countess Elster's punishments. The man leaned back in his chair, pulled out a new folder of papers, although he claimed that Kana should not return to a foreign house. With a quick glance at his daughter, he ordered her to stay in the Addis estate until he decided otherwise. But his next words completely shattered her heart, for now she could not leave the Addis estate without paternal permission. Kana tried to say something, but her father was not finished. So after a pause, he declared that his daughter would never leave the empire. Just then, Kana realized her mistake. She had been reckless in mentioning her dreams to her father, and if these involved traveling to other lands, he would never allow it. Kana understood that her father hated her so much that even the idea of her achieving her dreams enraged him, so even if she knelt before him, it would not change his decision. She forgot her father had always hated her, so now he could inflict even more suffering on her. But before leaving, Kana had to say her last words, so she slammed her hand on the table to get his attention. The action did not provoke a storm of emotions in the man, but he looked at her, putting aside his work. The girl's aura darkened. She did not hide her anger, and told her father that he had just deeply disappointed her, not waiting for a response. The girl shot a dry phrase, hoping that in the future her father would change his decision. The bells began to ring when the door to the office slammed shut. Alexander Addis was sitting at the table. He wearily tilted his head and did not touch the work emails again. Upon exiting to the hallway, Kana leaned wearily against the office door, too exhausted to move on. From the back of the hallway, a voice rang out that the girl hoped never to hear again. Isabel was approaching someone Kana hadn't seen since the incident with Lucy's illness. But instead of the girl, Kana's attention was caught by the envelope she held in her hand. Isabel didn't know what reaction to expect from her sister, so she kept her distance. Kana didn't want this meeting, but now she could not flee. Isabel was surprised to see Kana in their father's office, a place rarely accessed by children. Kana feared that her sister had told him about Lucy's poisoning. Approaching Isabel, Kana murmured ironically that she could always turn her worst fears into reality, so she hoped she had learned her lesson. Isabel had been threatened, so she could not say anything. However, before Kana could leave the hallway, the Recap manhwa girl turned and pressed the envelope against her chest. The message was nicely packaged, but inside was an invitation from the imperial family. Isabel smiled disdainfully. She wasn't even bothered that Kana had received the invitation. For the second princess's birthday party, since for the Addis family, it was just a formality. Shoving Kana, her sister mocked that she wouldn't have the courage to go to the event anyway, as she continued to be a subject of ridicule in the aristocratic world. Kana took the envelope from her sister's hands. She didn't care much for her scant words. Isabel took the silence as a victory, and boasted again that unlike Kana, she could show her face with pride, in public. The girl stated that she would always be Alexander Addis's favorite daughter, no matter what action she committed. Then she turned and headed to her room, telling Kana not to cross the allowed boundaries. Several months passed, but the people on this property remained the same. They wanted to see Kana as the cornered girl who could not defend herself. Kana smiled with satisfaction at her conclusions. She would not allow the rules of this property to dominate her. As a girl, when Kana got her own lab, she began to spend a lot of time studying alchemy. She didn't want to spend much time in the house. It was easier for her to hide in the basement and go unnoticed. Alchemy was an innate gift for Kana, so she strived to use that knowledge profitably. Extracting magic from mana stones requires innate skills. When Kana conducted the experiment to resurrect the flower, she understood that alchemy would be linked to her life, forever. At that moment, the girl was still full of warm hopes of receiving praise for her achievements. But her father demanded that she stop doing experiments. That day, Kana promised that no one would know of her talent. Otherwise, her father threatened to close the laboratory. In another life, as Li Juhua, Kana managed to fulfill her dreams of a happy life. There she had no father, so she was free to pursue her desires. However, forgetting the past was reckless. Her father would never stop hating her, so she shouldn't nurture illusions that her achievements mattered to him. Kana did not rush to leave the hallway. The pain of betrayal by her own forgetfulness in the office tormented her. She clenched the envelope with the invitation and furious threw it to the floor. She couldn't contain her breakdown and began to shout insults against her father, who was a psychopath that enjoyed torturing his daughter. The plan had failed. She could not leave the estate nor get a divorce because of that. As she never wished to return to the body of Li Juhua after calming down, she sat on the floor of the hallway. She could not continue living like a rat in the basement, so she had to come up with a new plan. The main objective remained the divorce, after which Kana could leave and begin the life she had when she was Li Juhua. She had a dream of opening a hospital in her name. Perhaps the place and the body had changed, but it was what she had worked hard for years. Kana headed to the basement, lit a lamp to review the laboratory records. She might not return to another world, but she always had to have a plan in case she needed to rebuild her life. In the Western continent, while gathering all the notes, Kana understood that she had given a new opportunity to achieve the divorce. The invitation to the second princess's birthday was a perfect excuse to get noticed. After all, at such an event, the most famous and influential aristocrats of the empire would gather. Kana looked at herself in the mirror. Her status as an aristocrat couldn't be denied. She was simply the Duchess Valen of the Hades family, even though her name hadn't received compliments yet, the name of someone private, from the status of hostess. According to rumors, Kana Addis was a woman degraded to the level of servitude and deprived of the splendor her husband had access to. It was time to get rid of the bad reputation. Now people should not fear her black hair and eyes, just because they were a sign of sin. Now is the moment when Kana Addis would become a lady whom others would fear to look at, not for bad rumors, but for her superiority over the others. They knocked on the laboratory door, catching the young woman off guard. Kaylin entered the room. He had heard rumors about their father's refusal to approve Kana's divorce. The sister advised her brother to take care of their father himself, since he could not expel her from the house while their father's order was still in effect. Kaylin was annoyed that his sister planned to spend all her time in the basement and offered to help her move the laboratory upstairs. The brother's concern pleased her. He insisted that she change locations so she wouldn't hide in dirty rooms. But from her past, she clearly remembered that any interest from her brother in her affairs was just a mask. At any moment, he could throw a verbal blow that would destroy all her hopes of getting closer. Even in the past, he had personally advised her not to go upstairs and to spend all her time in the basement. Remembering past events, the young woman brusquely told her brother not to come down to her basement without important news. Then they would have the opportunity to improve their relationship. Kaylin tried to address his sister, but Kana was annoyed by his attempts to call her sister, so she reminded him again of their agreement to use only their names. The poison bubbling in the girl's chest came to light. She recommended that Kaylin call her the Duchess of Valentino, if her name was unpleasant to him. The boy wasn't stupid. He understood the message that they had no intention of speaking with him, so he proposed to close a new deal. But the boy had no proposal, so he began to improvise, indicating to Kana that he could still take care of Lucy. The girl didn't like that conversation. She decided that Callum was hinting that he didn't trust her. But the boy asked his sister to pay attention that Lucy's health problems would be constant due to the pressure from other family members. Lucy could not relax completely, so the paralysis symptoms could reappear. Kana knew beforehand that she was similar to Lucy, but when Callan expressed it, he put her in a dilemma. The brother proposed to create a remedy that would keep Lucy's mind and body in shape since she could hide the pain she felt. The brother promised to pay any price that would convince Kana to care for Lucy. The silence stretched. Kaylin awaited his sister's conditions. After evaluating the options, Kana set a price of 2,000 gold coins, a significant amount, even for aristocrats. The brother's response came immediately. He accepted the payment. The promptness of the response surprised the girl. He clarified that he needed gold coins and not silver. She couldn't understand why he was trying so hard to please her. The boy assured his sister that the price didn't matter. They would pay any other amount that Kana set. Accepting the situation, Kana asked her brother for a maid with good skills and a strong character. Kaylin's generosity was helpful, but Kana doubted he would meet her conditions. Although once she saw how Callan was willing to do anything, Lucy asked of him. In the girl's mind, doubt arose about whether Kaylin would do something similar before, but there was no way to get an answer now. So she extended her hand toward him in an incomprehensible gesture. After reflecting, Kana announced that from now on, Kaylin would be her companion at the banquet for the second princess's birthday. A few days passed, and Kana hoped that Kaylin would give up since attending a banquet with an exile would be humiliating for him. Although after the agreement, they signed a pact, this did not guarantee anything. Meanwhile, Kana did not know exactly what the boy was planning, but she did not intend to back down from the pact. She intended to make the most of Kaylin's opportunities to achieve what she needed for her new plan. Kana now had a new maid named Ray as a result of one of the points in the pact. The maid was very cheerful, which sometimes made Kana think that she was too naive to work in the Duke's palace. The girl sat in front of the mirror. She wanted to test the maid's skills in haircuts, so she decided to change the length of her bangs. The maid began the cut, carefully removing the excess hair, while Kana instructed her on the tasks that needed to be completed before the banquet. Observing the work, Kana decided to try techniques from her previous life. When the maid finished the cut, Kana praised her for the good result, which made her blush. But suddenly panic took over Kaylin. He shuddered and started apologizing. As she calmed down, the girl confessed that she had not expected gratitude, which brought a sincere smile to Kana's face. The day of the banquet arrived, and Orsini and Isabel entered Kaylin's room, surprised by the news that their brother would accompany her to the date. Isabel didn't understand how her brother could demean himself like that before a sister that even the other aristocrats did not respect. Orsini was furious. He tried to convince Kaylin of how much his reputation would fall if he decided to appear in society alongside an exile. Kaylin did not agree with his brother, but he found it amusing, as he would never have thought of attending an event with someone marked by the family's shame. For a moment, Orsini tried to imagine such an attitude, but his pride prevented him. Isabel also agreed with her brother. She did not want to participate in events with Kana. Orsini made a decision he and Isabel would attend the banquet separately from Kaylin. Kaylin did not care about his relatives' suggestions. He decided to spend the day with his other sister, making a disdainful gesture. Orsini headed for the exit. He didn't want to worry about his brother's reputation if he also didn't care to do so. Isabel followed him, but before she managed to give Kaylin a sneering smile. The echo of the doors slamming resonated through the room. Kaylin waited for his sister. He hadn't seen her in 2 weeks since she had been hiding in the palace quarters. Lucy's treatment was progressing according to the contract. However, due to his academic and work obligations, Kaylin could not see Kana. A few times he found Rhea, but she was too busy with her tasks for Kaylin to get to know the staff. The boy decided that if he started investigating Kana's life, she would become even colder to him. Kaylin assumed that his sister was intentionally avoiding him, but knowing her new character, that behavior was not like her, especially now. She had begun to care about him. Her mood was constantly improving. Probably at that moment, in the lab when they were about to sign a new contract, it awakened a feeling of guilt. At that moment, he felt uncomfortable, as if it were only guilt that pulled him toward his sister. But perhaps it was not just guilt. The actions of the past deserved sincere regret. The boy pushed those thoughts away. He did not need memories. Now he had to focus on the upcoming evening, since he didn't need anything from his sister. Therefore, he should not desire anything in return. The boy decided that all his ambivalent feelings would disappear. Once the shared evening was over, Kana appeared in the room. Kaylin noticed her approach, but what he saw shocked him. The girl extended her hand. When she stood up from the sofa, the boy was fascinated, extending his palm toward Kana's hand, without hesitation. As he took the girl's hand, he tried to control his emotions, but his face did not hide his admiration. In the last weeks, Kana had dedicated a lot of time to prepare for dinner, so her dress followed the style of the world she lived in. As Li Ju, the red and black tones of the dress looked incredible on her, and she knew it so. Tonight, she would not be the scared Kana Addis, but would present herself to the aristocrats as the proud Duchess of Valentino. Kaylin was surprised to see his sister, so he didn't even manage to hear the question she asked him. Approaching, the girl asked him again if the scent of the perfume she wore suited her well, only for the second time. The boy realized that the floral aroma emanating from the woman was unique. Kaylin complimented her, as was fitting for an aristocrat. But Kana noticed a slight confusion on his face. She had spent the last days in the lab recreating the perfume she wore when she was in Li Juhua's body. The effect the fragrances had on Kaylin pleased her, as even in another world the perfume made an impression. Without wasting more time, the girl headed for the exit of the hall, grabbing her brother's arm. She took him with her, since from that moment began the time Kaylin had to spend accompanying his sister. The situation was new for Kaylin, and excited he almost called her sister, but he remembered his agreement in time. Recap Manhwa Isabella Addis arrived at the imperial banquet before anyone else, so she managed to infiltrate the princess's room to complain about Kana's imminent visit. She knew that the princess had wanted to meet Kana for a long time, so she did not miss the opportunity to spread some rumors. The banquet had started a while ago. However, before Isabel's arrival, Princess Lillian spent her time drinking tea alone. The princess had held a grudge against Kana for a long time, since it was she who married Duke Valentino to prevent him from marrying the emperor's daughter. But during the 7 years of marriage, Kana never attended events where Lillian could see her. The princess knew that the marriage between Sylvian and Kana had been decided by agreements, but it surprised her that the duke's wife finally decided to appear in public. Isabel approached the terrace, but Lillian was watching her closely, since many knew the rumors about the Addis family's relationships. In the few occasions that Kana attended events, she always hid from prying eyes, and her family members pretended not to be her relatives. Lillian's attitude toward Kana Vallenito was based on rumors and discussions. Therefore, in her eyes, the Duchess of Vallenito always seemed despicable and helpless. Isabel shouted, attracting the attention of the princess, who found the topic more interesting. She always seemed despicable and helpless. Recap Manhwa Isabel shouted, drawing the attention of the princess, who found the topic more interesting than the celebration of the birthday. In the banquet hall, loud whispers reached the princess's terrace, and while Isabel was furious, Lillian prepared to meet Kana.